Hey, what's going on? Welcome to episode 6 of the Former Action Guys podcast. I'm your host, Justin Kramer. This week we have my buddy from First ANGLICO on. His name is Michael Cullen. Before he was with ANGLICO, he was a Cobra pilot with HMLA 369. And, he did that for a while and then came to ANGLICO and then went into the reserves for a little bit, on to corporate America. And now he is studying for his master's at USC, where they have the Masters of Business for Veterans program. So overall, good podcast. I think it's really interesting, especially for people that may not be in the military, that are looking at maybe a flight contract or something like that. So he gets some insight into OCS because he is our first officer guest, which is, that's cool. We get the other side of the story on here. We're not all, we used to, him and I and a couple of the other captains and stuff, I used to give them shit, they'd give me shit, back and forth, and it's just all in good fun. Some people take it too seriously about the officer enlisted stuff. There is a distinction, but it's one of those things, as long as you can be professional at work and stuff like that, you just got to know the line, I guess, and I think we always did a pretty good job, but now we're both out, so I can talk as much shit to them as I want, so I enjoy that. Anyway, good show, kind of long. This one's about 3 hours. I considered cutting it into 2 podcasts, and I would actually like some feedback. So if people could hit me up at formeractionguyspodcast@gmail.com. That's formeractionguyspodcast@gmail.com. Let me know what you think. If you think if I should cut some of these episodes in half or make them shorter. The first 5 episodes were recorded while I did my road trip. So I don't really have time to be able to do an hour with a guy and then come back and do another hour with them later on. This is like a one-time thing, so I wanted to get their entire story. Now that I'm back here, I can probably do a bunch of smaller, shorter interviews, but I also do like the long form where it can really let someone get deep into what they did and some of the minutia and stuff that that they went through during their career. So any kind of feedback, hit me up on the website, jkramergraphics.com. I have a comment section on there, or a contact us section, or you can hit me up on my Instagram at jkramergraphics. Any one of those options, give me some feedback on the show, what you think about it, what you don't like, what you do like. We did get another 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, so whoever you were, appreciate that. No one's left an actual word review, just 5-star reviews, so appreciate that. We're just over a month in, a month and 3 days. And I think we've crossed the 800 downloads or streams of the podcast so far. So I appreciate everyone that's jumping on, and I really hope everyone's, spreading the word about it and stuff like that. And again, if you know someone that's a veteran that you think would be good for the show, or someone that should have their story put down, just for history. This is history. This is the stuff that won't be in the history books. These individuals, the acts that they did are important. And I think they should be documented, even if it's only for them, for posterity purposes, or something that their family can have later on. I don't know. I just think it's good information, and at a point now where the war is dwindling down and you have less people that are deploying and stuff like that, I think it's also good to hear. And this isn't just about people that have gone to war and stuff like that. So far it has been, but I don't expect that it will always be like that. Like I said in the first podcast, totally cool with doing firefighters, police officers, former action guys. Give me some people that have some cool stories and stuff like that. I want them on the show. So, anyway, this week, again, Michael Cullen. I'm not going to drag us on anymore, so hit me up, formeractionguyspodcast@gmail.com, or Instagram, jkramergraphics, or jkramergraphics.com. So, see you guys after the show. All right, welcome to the podcast. Today I got my buddy Michael Cullen on, call sign Archer. He's a AH-1 Whiskey? You didn't do Zulu, did you?
Nope, just the whiskey.
Okay, AH-1 Whiskey pilot, and me and him and I worked together at First ANGLICO. Before that, actually, I'll just let you want to introduce yourself and kind of where you're from and where you went to school and stuff. You're the first officer on the podcast, by the way.
Yeah, great honor.
Scumbags.
So, yeah, everybody loves this, being on the old pod with the former swine. So... from Cincinnati, Ohio, went to college at Miami of Ohio, not the University of Miami, 2 different things. After that, joined the Marine Corps in 2007, which we'll probably get into a little bit later, more in depth. And then now I live up in Orange County, and I'm going to school at USC to get my master's degree.
Oh yeah, man. So you went to OCS in 2007. When did you actually start your like process to join while you were still in school?
Yeah. So
were you ROTC?
For a little bit.
Okay.
But I didn't get into the Marine Corps through ROTC. So I did this program called the Platoon Leaders Corps.
Okay.
So what that was is you basically go down and you go hang out with a recruiter once a month during school. And then in the summers between my sophomore and junior and senior year, I went to OCS for 6 weeks at a time. So I went to basic training or OCS twice.
How is that coming back? Is there a lot of guys that were like, fuck this, and they just didn't come back?
There was a lot of that. I don't want to say a lot of it. There were some people that, I mean, like, you know, life just happens. Like, I had one of my good buddies who did great at OCS the first time we went around, and then he went back and knocked up his girlfriend, and then, you know, next thing you know, he's an engineer, and he's not joining the Marine Corps. But it was hard going back. It was the only time that I've ever actually thrown up out of nervousness when I got off the plane.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, in D.C. I remember I heard all the DIs like yelling at the kids coming down the escalator, and I just went into the bathroom and threw up, and then I was like, whatever, it's 6 weeks, you can go do this. So
get the power puke out of the way. All right, we're good now. Let's go do this. So how was, okay, first off, you guys don't go like the normal boot camp like we do. Do you guys do like the yellow footprints and like you guys don't arrive at night and stuff like that, right? Isn't it like a daytime? It's way more laid back.
It's I don't know if laid back's the right term to use,
okay.
But I mean the way that we would go is we had I think they were called officers selection officers, which was like our recruiter.
The OSOs.
Yeah. So like mine was in Louisville because I went to school north of Cincinnati, and we drove down and stayed in Louisville the night before, and then basically got up in the morning and got on a plane, and then we got to Quantico, so we flew into like Dulles Airport and landed at like 10 o'clock in the morning, and then you basically just get on the bus, and then they take you straight to Quantico. And
what was that bus ride like? What'd you think about that?
It was really like nervous. Like some people were talking. It's kind of a lot of the same things you get with people that are going to boot camp. Like some people are talking, other people are like, just sitting there like kind of, what did I do? Like, the second time going back though, there wasn't a lot of talking. People knew what was coming, and it was just like, all right.
Yeah, because there's no new people. You guys are all 6 week guys, right?
It was like let's get this over with.
That's funny. Yeah, you always have the guys that talk shit. They're like, "Oh, my dad was a Marine drill instructor, so I know what's coming." Blah blah. I say that specifically because we had a kid that specifically said that, and then he made it to about week 8, and then he left boot camp. He didn't make it, so I thought that was hilarious. But what are you gonna do? So how'd you like boot camp? Or not boot camp, OCS. We get IT'd a lot in boot camp. I was told that you don't really do a lot of IT. It's more like they make you write papers. They make you do... Yeah. You guys do peer evals and stuff like that. Like, we don't do any of that in boot camp. You just get slayed.
Yeah, so it's a little bit different. So, like, as far as, like, the ITing and all of that stuff, like, we don't have that because we have all those, you screw something up, you got to write a 300-word essay on it, like... handwritten on a Write in the Rain or like a little notebook or something like that. But we would have a lot of individual, physical training events and stuff like that were a little bit more intense than you guys would have at boot camp, because like you're expected to show up there like in super good shape. That's one of the ways that they evaluate you as like an officer candidate. So we would have a lot more of that, and I would say it's more of a mental thing. Like there's a mental aspect that goes into it in boot camp, obviously, but it's more of a mental game where they play with you at OCS, because there's a lot of times where they want you to think like, are you going to get kicked out? Are you going to go home? Like all that stuff. So it's not like at boot camp where like, if you're going home, you've done something wrong, or like, at OCS, like you could go home, like if you fail one of the PT events and like you didn't meet the cutting score or whatever it was that they called it. I forget the exact names. Like, you could just be, kicked out.
And that's a pretty quick process there, isn't it? They don't really hold on to the candidates that are being removed for very long. Yeah.
I mean, from what I remember, there was kind of like, I don't want to say like a 3 strikes thing, but it wasn't like if you screwed one thing up, you were gone. But I mean, you could be, if you hit the limit of things you can do wrong, you could be gone that afternoon.
I think that's a huge wow, that's really quick actually. That's a huge difference between the officer and the enlisted side, because the enlisted side, it's like they're there they want to retain them. So it's super hard to get kicked out of boot camp. I mean, it's real hard. I saw a kid I left because I came out of Indianapolis. A kid I came there with, God, this poor bastard. We went to boot camp together. We flew down there, and he was like overweight, not in shape at all, like couldn't do any pull-ups. Like, I don't even know how they sent him. And he was in our platoon for a couple weeks, and then they're like, you're out of shape, you're going to the pork chop platoon, PCP. Kicked him back to that. We see him at the rifle range like weeks later, and he's, you know, a couple weeks behind us. And then I guess he got dropped from them again. And when we were going to do family day, because there's weapons in the squad bay, they bring in people to do fire watch from other platoons. They brought him to do fire watch on our squad bay. This kid that was originally in our platoon, and he was still like 6 weeks from graduation. And I don't know if he ever made it, but it just shows you, like, they will keep recycling dudes. And dudes that try to fake medical stuff to get out. We had a kid who faked asthma. They sent him to medical, and then I think he came back like a week later and was like, hey guys, don't fake it. I fucked up. He's like, there's a kid that's in medical that's been there for over 300 days in this platoon. And I'm like, Jesus. He's like, just finish boot camp. Like, don't make my mistake. So I think that's like a huge difference between, I mean, which I guess it should be. You guys are obviously held to a higher standard.
Yeah.
And there's
well,
more
one of the other
expectation.
things you have to remember too is, like, OCS is not always stocked like Parris Island or San Diego is. So they'll bring drill instructors in. A lot of them are assistant Marine officer instructors that work at colleges for ROTC. So they'll come in the summer. And so classes typically go in the summer from like June to August. They'll have 2 6-week sessions and 1 concurrent 10-week session that go that time. And then they'll do 1 class in the winter. So there's not a, like, you can't go on a medical hold or something like that. So if you end up going on a medical hold, you can get recycled to the next year if you want to, but you don't end up just being stuck
just
there
not
in
consistent.
Purgatory.
Wow.
Exactly. So like they go down, you know, in the spring and the fall, they go down to like a skeleton permanent staff there. So they'll bring a lot of people in TAD, like a lot of the platoon commanders and things like that. There'll be people that are waiting to class up for EWS or the schools at Quantico or something like that. So they'll come over and do that for just 6 weeks right before they start their next job.
Okay. So then once you get done with boot camp, or OCS, sorry, what happened then? So you go to TBS after that, or did you do something in between?
Yeah, so I went back and graduated.
Were you an air contract, by the way?
Yes, so I was an air contract. So they're the 2 things what he's getting at. There's actually 3 of them. So you can go in as a ground contract, which is, you know, your standard, what you'd think of in the Marine Corps. You can go in as an air contract, which you could sign up to be either a pilot or a naval flight officer. And then the other one that you can do is you could be a law contract, but that's a little bit different. I'm not sure. I think you have to already be like accepted to law school and all of that.
Oh, okay.
So those are the 3 ways that you can go into all of these programs.
So you got accepted. What did it take, for the people that don't know, like, what does it take to get a, like, dedicated air contract?
Yeah, so when I went through, you had to have 20/20 vision. I think that's since changed.
Really?
I think you can do it with 20/20 corrected vision now, or maybe LASIK or something. Like I remember when I went through, it was a big deal to have like 20/20 vision to be a pilot. You had to take the ASTB, which is the air equivalent of like the AVSVAB test. So, you know, you got to go through, and that, like, it basically judges like your aptitude to be a pilot. And then it's based on, you know, your college GPA, your PFT, all those things go into like your package. And then you can apply to be a ground or an air contract with your OSO.
Do you have to be one of those contracts, or can you come in and just be like, I just want to be an officer, I don't really care where I go?
That you'd be a ground contract
at
that point. So yeah, for me, I didn't know what I wanted to do, and the guy was like, hey, we're short pilots, you should be an air contract. I was like, that sounds fantastic.
Let's do that.
So yeah, I did that. I actually got accepted 3 days before OCS started.
Oh, nice.
So
nice.
Yeah.
So when you got done with OCS, then you go to TBS, and that's what, 6 months?
Yeah, it's about 6 months.
Okay. So for the Marines, or the people that aren't Marines or don't know, TBS, every officer has to go through that. Every Marine officer has to go through that, no matter their MOS.
Yep.
And that's where most people find out where they're going on after that. Right? That's where they find out their jobs, usually.
Right. So, yeah, what TBS is, it's basically, OCS is on one side of the base at Quantico. We call it going across the highway or whatever, and then you go to TBS. And then so from there, it's more of the same kind of evaluation things, right? So you're evaluated on physical scores, but it's a lot more academic stuff. So you learn all of the basic Marine Corps warfighting functions, all those things. And then there's a lot of leadership instruction there. So based off of all the grades that you receive on all the tests, the evals, there's peer evaluations that go into it. You get ranked in a certain order. And then based off of that, you put in your wish list of what you want to do.
Oh, your top 3 or whatever.
Right. And then so from there, all the different platoon commanders from your TBS company get together and like assign you certain jobs based on like what you want to do, what they think you're a good fit for. And the thing a lot of people don't understand about this outside of the officer corps is they do it in a tiered system. So they'll break it down into 3 tiers.
Yeah. I didn't know this for the longest time. Go ahead.
Yeah, so you've got the way that it would set up, think of it as like in thirds, right? So you don't want everybody when you're there who's a ground well, I don't want to say everybody. I'd say 90% of the people want to be infantry or artillery or some kind of combat arms, right?
Yeah.
So you can't have all of the phenomenal officers that are in the top like third of their class go into that. So they spread load all those things. So I had a real good friend who was like, 60 in the class, which is really good out of 300, right?
Yeah.
And then he ended up getting an MOS that he didn't necessarily want. Like he always wanted to be.
He was like
grunt.
middle third or whatever.
Exactly. So he was the middle of the top third. So he didn't get. He got like his 7th choice, right? So.
Do you agree with the way they do that, or?
I think it has to be like that, right? I mean, it sucks because it's just one of those things. It's like it's life. Like,
yeah, if you're like, I was in the top third of the class, but I'm a fucking suppo. Like, I wanted to be a recon guy.
Yeah. And I mean, as you know, like, in the military, there's ways, once you go and, like, get to your first tour, like, I had a good friend that he got into an MOS that he didn't necessarily want, and so he got to his first job, and he just volunteered, and he was like, I want to go be a police advisor in Iraq, and they were like, great. And they just pulled him, and then he basically got to go do, infantry style stuff.
Yeah. So do IA, like individual augment billets and stuff like that. Okay. So you finished TBS. Did you? I mean, you knew you were going to flight school, right? At this point, you already knew. So, what? Flight school's in Florida. Did you go home first, or did you go back, or did you just go straight to Florida?
No, so
because I know there's a wait sometimes for school. So
yeah, so when I graduated TBS in 2008. And there was a giant push to get us through flight school at the time because they were plussing up the Marine Corps. And I want to say that they had just deployed that Joint MEU to Afghanistan.
Okay.
Or they were getting ready to. And so they were like they were like, we need to get pilots through. So I drove from TBS, like the night of graduation, to back to Miami and went and partied for a night. And then I went and my parents were moving out of their house and they were like, you can have whatever you want here. So I went and grabbed a U-Haul truck and threw all my old furniture and everything. And then I was basically down in Pensacola 3 days after my graduation from TBS.
So, but once you get to Pensacola, you're in like a basic flight school, right? Like you don't know you're going to be fixed wing. You don't know if you're going to be skids.
Yeah.
So you show up thinking like, I'm just going to be a pilot, but I'm still wondering what I'm going to be, right?
Right. So you go down there and like any good Marine Corps school, right? You go to the pool where you wait to like actually start your class update, right? So the first thing that you have to go through when you get to Pensacola, everybody does this across the board, whether you're a pilot or an NFO, anybody related to flight, you go to API, which I think stands for Aeronautical Pre-Flight Introduction or Indoctrination, something like that. So what that is the first 4 weeks is all academics, and then in the morning you do swimming to prepare you for the swim qual that you have to do as a pilot. So what that does is the swimming and the academics weed people out. So there's a pretty high...
You already lose a bunch of dudes right there?
Yeah, so when we went through my class in 2008, we were the first class in like recent memory of any of the instructors or anybody that we didn't lose one person.
Oh, really?
And like there were other classes that would lose, you know, like you go through about 40 or 50 people, they'd lose like 5, 6, 7. So
if you're going down for that training, do they tell you like, hey, here's the swim qual that you're going to be expected to do? Like, do you know ahead of time?
Oh,
like,
yeah, absolutely.
So there's really no excuse for the guys that washed out.
And I mean, you get to that point, especially like the Marines, like you had to do your swim qual at TBS, and like the I want to say that all the officers had to do, was it the third class swim qual that's the hardest one, or was it the first?
No, third. Was 4. It was like 1 through 4 when you went through.
I think it was the third that was like not the super hard one, but like the more difficult one. So all the officers had to already do that. So like we had no problem, and most of us were in shape. This was a little bit different for the Navy guys that were going through, just because they hadn't been to like a formal school yet. Like they would graduate college, and this is the first place that they would go.
Oh, really?
So it was a little bit more of...
They hadn't gone to OCS yet?
Depending on if they went... So if the Navy went through ROTC, the first place they would show up would be API.
That's crazy.
If they were pilots, yeah. And then so same thing for Naval Academy guys. That would be the first non-Naval Academy thing. And then there's...
How do you feel about that? The Naval Academy guys that don't go to OCS, the Marine ones specifically.
Yeah.
How do you feel about those dudes that don't do TBS either, right?
Well, no, they do go to TBS.
Oh, okay.
I mean,
some dudes get butthurt. They're like, they never went to fucking OCS.
I don't know. Like, we know each other. That kind of shit doesn't bother me.
Yeah.
So, like, it's one of those things. Like, okay, whatever.
Yeah.
But
so you got down to flight school. I had a Cash.
Yeah.
I can't remember his actual name, but Cash.
We don't have to use Christian names.
I remember he told me he was telling me about doing the swim qual, and he's like, yeah, I'd show up and get the smallest like flight suit I could, soak it in water, and put it on like a wetsuit, so it was like super streamlined. He's like, the swim qual kind of sucks, but he's like, that's the only way you can make it a little better. He's like people go in there with these baggy ass flight suits, they're normal ones, and just struggle the entire time. So I didn't realize it was like that difficult of a swim qual to do.
Yeah, it's I think it was like it ended, you had to do a mile swim, which I mean, at that point in time, you know, you've been through TBS and all this stuff, and you're in shape.
Yeah, you're in like the best shape you've ever been. Yeah, you're in your early 20s probably.
And I don't think there was a time limit on it, so it was just kind of like, you know, like I could always swim, so it was like whatever.
And it was in the pool too, right? It was
exactly.
Open water.
It's not in the open water. So you did one open water exercise, and it wasn't even like evaluated. So
after you get done with that, what's the first aircraft that they put you in?
So I flew the T-34, which
I think that's a prop aircraft too, right?
Right. So it's a prop aerobatic aircraft. I think that all of those are gone now, and they've gone to the T-6, which is just a more juiced up modern version of the T-34. So because I went through flight school now, like 13 years ago.
You old fuck.
Yeah.
What did they have you? I remember my first Aero Tiger. He was a Cobra, or no, he was a Huey guy.
I went through TACP school with him, actually.
Oh, cool. Yeah. Nice. He's a good dude. Him and I were with 3-6 together in Afghanistan in 2011. He was talking about like he was out doing the first like acrobatic stuff, and that he was struggling doing the not the barrel roll, the loop.
Yeah. And
he was like, dude, I'm just out there, you know, flying in circles, like, because I guess you're on your own and you have to do it within a certain amount of time or whatever. And he was just telling me about it. So if you want to talk about kind of some of the training you have to do as a like acrobatic wise, like your initial flight training.
So you basically you go and you have like your first week and you learn all the systems in the aircraft of everything. It's like a ground school thing, which is pretty standard for any marine aviation school.
And real quick, did you have any flight training prior to this?
Yeah, or actually we skipped one part. So was this?
I mean, civilian wise,
right? So prior to actually API, I forgot about this. We did this thing called introductory flight screening, which I think is now not a thing anymore. But the Marines would actually pay to put you through a civilian flight school.
No way, that's sick.
So they put you through, it was like, I think I had 25 hours in the Cessna. So they would basically do that because it was cheaper to identify if you could
If
fly
you're struggling
that,
at a Cessna,
then put you in like an aerobatic plane and waste flight hours and maintenance and everything.
is there a huge difference between like a Cessna and the plane that you were flying?
Oh, like absolutely. Like think of the Cessna as something like, you know, a Geo Metro, Honda Civic style thing, and then you get in like a T-34, and I would say like a T-34 is maybe, I don't know, like not a Ferrari, but it's got like a little bit more juice.
Like
maybe
a souped
like
up Camaro or something.
Yeah, you know, you could do some fun stuff in it. It goes a little bit faster. You can go upside down. Whereas a Cessna, you would try to not be upside down.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So back to what you're going through the aerobatic stuff or the acrobatic stuff. Is it acrobatic or
Aerobatic.
Aerobatic stuff.
And acrobats are the ones on trapeze.
Yeah. How'd you do with all that? How do you think you did on your like first part of flying? Like, oh shit, here I am doing loop the loops and all this other stuff.
I mean, it was one of those things. Like it was fun, but I don't know. It just wasn't like doing barrel rolls. Everybody was like, "Oh, that must have been awesome." I was like, "Yeah, it was cool," but it was also one of those things where I could scare myself enough when I was doing it by myself, where I was like, "Yeah, maybe I don't do that next time." You know, so that was actually the time that I thought that I wanted to fly helicopters before that, but doing all of that stuff, I was like, I think I actually do want to fly helicopters now.
Yeah.
You know, because after you do all the barrel rolls and all that aerobatic stuff, then you go into your instrument training, which is flying in the clouds.
Okay.
So that's the second half of the T-34, which is called primary flight training.
How long does that take?
6 months total.
Okay.
So it's like, I'd say 6 to 8 weeks of like introduction, and then you have about 4 weeks of aerobatics, and then the last 2 to 3 months are instrument and formation flight training. So you don't get your FAA instrument qualification there, but you do enough to see if you know how to fly in the clouds, so they'll invest the money in you to do it in the future.
Okay.
And like actually rate you in either a helicopter, a jet, a C-130, whatever it is.
What do you think was the hardest part about that intro part, between like the formation flying, all that stuff?
The formation flying was awesome. That was the coolest stuff. I would say that the instrument, to like figure it out and just to be able to like flying off of a little needle that's pointing to a number and trying to remember like what end of the needle do I need to move and how do I make that move to where I want to go, and being able to like picture in space where you are
rather than what you're feeling.
Exactly. And it wasn't even that, whereas you had to maintain the aircraft in level flight, so you're doing that while you're trying to figure out like, do I need to turn left here, do I need to turn right, and like trying to put that whole like 3D picture together was really difficult to figure that out. But it was one of those things which I think a lot of people would echo, is once you figure it out, you kind of like know it.
Okay.
You know? So like I could probably go back and do it now. Like I would need a little bit of practice, but I could still go back and do it. You know what I mean?
When's the last time you flew?
About 2 years ago when I got out of the reserves.
Oh, okay. So your last flight was in a Cobra then?
Ago? Yeah, 2 years ago. Yeah.
Okay. So when you get done at the end of the T-34 stuff, is that when you get told what your platform is, or is there like follow-on training to that before you get selected for fixed wing, rotary wing, whatever?
So when you get done primary, again, you make a wish list. So you can either do jets, helos, or multi-engine, which multi-engine is only C-130s in the Marine Corps. So you don't know your platform, but you know if you're going to be flying jets, helos, or one of those three.
Okay.
So.
And you picked, was your top one?
Mine was helos.
Yeah.
So, because I knew, like, I knew that I wanted to fly helos. I didn't know what at that point, but.
What was your second choice?
I think my second choice was C-130.
Yeah.
Those guys make a lot of money.
Those dudes, I'll tell you, those guys are the guys that are like, dude, this is the best kept secret in the Marine Corps. They're like, we go everywhere, we can bring as much as we want with us, and it's super chill. So, I don't know.
Never seen an unhappy C-130 pilot or an unhappy C-17 pilot.
Yeah, they're all pretty satisfied with what they're doing.
Yeah.
They get some good TAD spots. How many guys were butthurt at the end of that when they didn't get like fixed wing? Because I imagine most dudes are coming in like, I'm gonna be, Maverick flying me and Goose.
Yeah, they're a lot. I mean, there's no way to sugarcoat it. The guys that I went through flight school with are great, and like we all knew that we wanted to be helo pilots just based on some of the jet pilots that we had met.
Oh yeah.
So and you have like it's.
What are you talking about? Skid guys are the biggest assholes.
Yeah. But, I mean, it was just like, a lot of the guys that wanted to be jets were, like, super high-strung, and they needed it, and, like, they wanted to do it, which, I mean, hey, whatever. Like, if that's what you want to do, that's what you want to do. It's just, like, that kind of life wasn't for me. I didn't want to.
I mean, you talk to some of these guys, like the Harrier pilots and stuff, and, like, they'll tell you, it's like, dude, almost every flight feels like a kick in the nuts. Like, you wonder, like, am I coming back from this flight? Like, they have a lot of stuff to worry about, especially in a single jet like a Harrier. If you're not in a two-seater like an F-18 or whatever, like, I don't know. I'm a ground guy, so I could be talking out of my ass, but from what dudes have told me, they're like, every flight's stressful because you're always checking a box for something. You're always getting whatever flaw.
We knew a jet guy that we could have that could talk about
I know. Yeah. I'm gonna see if one of my buddies he was my air officer. He's a law student now, and he was a Harrier pilot. I'm gonna see if he'll come on to the show. So hopefully for those that are listening, that'll be one of the future shows. His Harrier was one of the ones blown up in the attack on Bastion, actually. Yeah. So it'd be cool to see his perspective also. But anyway, back. So now you're like, okay, I'm going to Rotary Wing. Where do you go from there? Are you still in Pensacola? Do you stay there, or
so actually, let's backtrack with primary flight school. The 3 places you could go as a Marine pilot are in Pensacola, which is actually Milton, Florida, and then the other 2 are Corpus Christi, Texas, which is where I was, and then about 5% of the people go to Vance Air Force Base and fly with the Air Force, which is a whole different
Where's that
bag.
at?
It's in Oklahoma.
Okay.
It's right by Oklahoma City.
It's by Fort Sill too, because I remember people flying in there, and I'm like, who are they? And they're like, those are flight students for the Air Force. And I'm like, oh, I didn't. Yeah. I was like, fuck, that sucks.
Their
you guys are living it up in Florida. And they're out there in Oklahoma.
Their perception of primary flight school was completely different from what ours was.
Oh man,
so
that's a good spot, Florida. That was probably a great time down there. Did anybody get dropped for being like just going too wild partying down in Florida?
I mean, it happens.
Yeah, it's gonna happen. There's always a 10%.
Yeah, I mean, it happened where we were in Corpus Christi.
Yeah,
you're still on the water. We were like 2 hours from San Padre.
Okay,
and then you had like Port Aransas and some other places right there. I mean, it's a good time.
So when you got there, what did they have you initially start flying?
Oh, so sorry. So when we got done at Corpus Christi, right after the T-34, then I went back to Florida, which is where the helo training is.
Okay.
So when we got back to do the helo training, we flew the TH-57 Charlie, which they may have upgraded that to a different aircraft. So that's basically, it's a Bell 206 helicopter. So it's a helicopter that they use for like medevacs in the civilian world. It's the most prevalent helicopter in the world.
Oh, okay.
So
probably seen it flying around here then.
Yeah, if you've seen helicopters flying around, you've seen them. So,
okay. Yeah. How long did you train on that?
That was another 6 months, and so it was the big thing that you do in helo school is, again, you have like a FAM stage, right, where you learn basically how to handle the.
Aren't you basically relearning to fly? Because you're going from a plane to this fucking machine that shouldn't even be flying.
So it's different from, instead of having a throttle, you have a collective to control power. So instead of having the movement where you have a throttle where you're going forward and backward to control power with your left hand, now you have a collective where you're pulling up and down.
Yeah, it's like an e-brake kind of thing.
Right. And then so you're managing, that's how fast you want to move, and then you have the cyclic, which controls your direction, right? And then you have the pedals, which keep the tail from just not spinning around in 360. So it's a completely different concept than flying a plane.
How long did it take you before you were comfortable where you could fly it by yourself? Not maybe solo, but like you had the controls and you were good with it.
It takes I don't know, I would say probably like 5 or 6 flights, and a flight would be about an hour and 30 minutes or so. Yeah. Before you're like, okay, I can do this and not put it right into the ground.
Yeah, I'm not going to kill myself.
Yeah.
Maybe.
So
when you were there and you were with all the other guys that were going through the rotary wing training and stuff like that, was there like was Cobras like the goal for most people, or was it like I don't really care, or I don't really know? Like where did you want to be at after that?
Yeah, so for me, I didn't even know. I knew I wanted to go to the West Coast, right? So I knew that I didn't want to be in Camp Lejeune. I think that our TBS class was a little bit more difficult's not the word, a little bit more dickish maybe in comparison to others. So there were a lot of guys who were kind of over, the whole like hazing aspect of all of this stuff, right? And the Cobra pilots and Huey pilots we used to hear all the time like, oh, they eat their young and all this stuff.
Yeah.
Right? So there were a lot of guys who were just like, man, I don't want to go be a boot again. Like, I'm sick of this shit. Like, I was a boot at TBS. I was a boot at primary. I was a boot at Hilo school. Like, I want to go to a community where it's just, like, a safe life, So, like, I think that was a little bit more out of my peer group. But then there were other guys who were like, I want to be a Cobra pilot. Like, get out of my way. And just, I don't know. For me, I wanted to be on the West Coast. And I just did as well as I could to make sure that I ended up on the West Coast.
Okay. So, did you get to choose your duty station, or
So it was, you either get to pick, you could wait platform. So the ones that you could pick at the time were the Whiskey Cobra, the Zulu Cobra, the Huey. I think we could still pick 46s at that point.
They were letting you guys pick Zulu Cobra out of school?
Yeah, some classes could pick Zulu Cobras. My roommate that I lived with in Oceanside was the first like boot Zulu pilot.
Really?
So
I didn't even know they were they even in the fleet yet?
They had just gotten to the fleet.
So so what was this time frame for you?
This was
just so people are aware.
2010, summer of 2010.
Okay.
So
they were fielding the first dudes for the Zulus at that point.
Yeah, the Zulu had just finished all of its like evaluations, and they had written like the tactics books for it like loosely by about summer of 2010, and then they started taking pilots to like train on it.
Do you want to just go over like a quick unclassified, like the difference between like a Whiskey and a Zulu?
Yeah, so the Whiskey has been around since, I want to say like the 1980s-ish, late 1980s. Late 1980s, early 1990s. People will probably get mad that I don't know that, but whatever. Yeah.
Cobra guys are like, this motherfucker.
Yeah, so the way that I like to think of the Whiskey is later on in its career, which we can get to when we start talking about Afghanistan, but I got a better sense here, but I like to think of it as more of like a point and shoot aircraft where like somebody tells me that they're in a gunfight and you need to go down and shoot rockets and guns at something, and like, yes, it has Hellfires and it can shoot those as a standoff weapon from a distance, but it's more of something that you want to get down with the guys on the ground and like really get into it. And not to say that the Zulu can't do that, but it's designed to be more of like a standoff platform. So it's more of like a missile pig where it can shoot things at a farther distance, and it's got way better sensors that can pick this stuff up. So,
yeah, its targeting capabilities are
exactly.
a lot better.
It's a way more advanced aircraft. So.
I've heard guys that have flown both say that like the Whiskey is just like an old aircraft that you can do whatever you want with. Like, you can feel it, you can do it, whereas the Zulu is so advanced, like there's systems that'll keep you from doing certain things. There's like...
Yeah, there's nothing in the Whiskey that like will go back and tattle on you if you did something wrong. So like, I mean, obviously if you did something really wrong, you'd have to go back and be like, hey, I might have really fucked this thing up. But, I mean, there were just ways around that. In the Zulu, you go back and they have like little maintenance cards that they go run, and they know everything that happened with the aircraft. So,
and real quick, just to backstep real quick, when guys are getting platforms, it's not necessarily like, again, like OCS, the best dudes in the class aren't getting their pick, right? It's needs of the Marine Corps. Like, It's a little bit of both. It's like, hey, you were number 5 in the class, but there's only 2 jet spots, so you're going to this.
Yeah, I mean, it's more of instructor-based thing, at least that I saw, where the instructors had a little bit more input into like where people went to their final platform.
Okay.
Where they'd be like, I think that this guy is going to be a good Cobra pilot. I think that this guy would be a good 53 pilot. You know, and trying to match them with the like a good community for them. You know what I mean?
Okay.
So, and I would say that by the time you get to your like I was in helo school, and I think this was the same for the jet guys, like they know what they want to fly specifically, and I would say that the vast majority of those people get what they want.
Okay.
You know, at that point in time, because they
once you get into your platform, or once you get in, not your platform, but your
follow on, like your second, exactly.
Yeah.
So I think that they have a better idea what they want to do, and you just kind of fall into your community. You know what I mean? Because at flight school, you'll have, like, I had a 46 instructor, there was a Cobra instructor, there was a Huey guy there, and I mean, like, you could kind of see where you're going to fall out, and you can almost kind of identify it, like, you could see the instructors that are respected there that still have friends in the fleet, and they'd be like, this guy would fit in good, you know, with this group of people.
Yeah.
You know, so.
Okay. So now you've gotten selected for your platform. You're going to be a whiskey guy. You finished your initial, you know, rotary wing familiarization, whatever, and now you're moving on to that school. Where was that school at, or do you go to the RAG? Is that what you call the RAG when you go? Okay.
Yeah. So after you finish like that helo school, you actually get that's where you get your naval flight wings.
Okay.
So when you finish that secondary school, whether it's helos, multi-engine, or jets, you get your wings.
So once you get your wings, what all FAA certifications do you have at that point?
So at that point, you can get your commercial pilot's license. So I had my commercial rotary wing and fixed wing at that point. And then I think that was all, or no, and I could get my rotary wing instrument.
Okay.
So that was all that I could get at that point.
No, nothing for fixed wing stuff?
No, I did not get my fixed wing instrument stuff until
later on. I remember when you were going through that before, later on. So you get to the RAG. You're here at Camp Pendleton at the air station. What was that like? Like, you show up. What was it like? Hey, motherfucker! You know, like, tell us how it went.
I mean, it was a little bit different because when you go through flight school, everything, like, there are Marines there.
What rank are you at this time? Also, are you a lieutenant still or a captain?
I was a first lieutenant.
Okay.
So, by the time that I showed up to Camp Pendleton, I think I'd been in for just under 3 years. I think I got there in June of 2010, and I was commissioned in July of 2017, or July of 2007.
You old man. So,
yeah.
3 years. What was your contract?
So my contract was based on the date that I got my wings. And if you went helos, it was 6 years after the day you got your wings. And if you went jets, it was 8 years.
Oh, okay.
So.
Okay. So anyway, back to you get to Pendleton, and now you're starting your, like, Cobra specific. Did you do any flights with Cobras or anything before this? Or was it like you show up there and like, hey, here's the Cobra, let's do this?
There was they have like one day every 6 months down at your helo school where they fly all the helos in from the East Coast down to Milton, and then you get to like go for a ride in some of them. But like when I flew the Cobra, I mean, it was like 5 minutes, and they were like, "Hey, this is the Cobra. All right, get out." Next, you know, like it wasn't like we took off and went and flew around. You know, we did like one lap around the airfield, and the guy was like, "All right, what do you think?" I was like, "Oh, this is cool." And he's like, "All right, get out, boot.
Get out, boot."
Yeah.
What was it like? What was it like getting in, like just looking at all the controls and stuff compared to what you'd been flying up to that point? Were you like, "Oh shit!" Like
it was wild. So because the front seat of the Cobra is basically like a giant. It's like a gun. It's a gunship, right?
Yeah, you got like the front seat has everything.
Yeah, so in the old whiskey Cobra, like the thing that you get in and you move your feet around is like the sighting unit for the fucking gun. You know, like, and you're like,
and that's a look down too, right?
Yeah. You know, and you're just kind of sitting there. You're like, oh well, this is gonna get real at some point. I'm not just like out flying around Florida and
having a good time,
Pensacola at night.
You're paying me to fly planes and have a good time. Here we go. Was the training package at Pendleton pretty I don't know, was it like a high paced kind of training package, or what would you say about it?
So I mean
I'm sure you were in the books constantly. I mean, you feel
Yeah.
like you have to be for a job like
yeah,
that.
because I mean the way that I looked at flight training all the time is you show up to a unit and they give you all your books, right? So up until this point through flight school, really the only thing that mattered for us were the NATOPS, which is like how it's broken down in like 22 chapters, but it's basically the things that you cannot do in the aircraft, or if something goes...
Here's your rules. Don't draw a sky penis.
Yeah. But, you know, it's got all those things in there, like how the aircraft works, like if this happens, do this in an emergency procedure, right? It's like, that's what all flight school is. And when you first get to Pendleton in the, it's not called the RAG anymore, it's called the FRS, the Fleet Replacement Squadron, was the new term. But, so you get there, and like, that was the first thing that you'd focus on is that. So before you even started flying, you had another ground school. You had to know the NATOPS. You had to know all the operating limits for, like, you know, the oil pressure and all that stuff, and you get quizzed on all of those and your emergency procedures, like if something breaks in the aircraft, you know. So because now you're flying like an aircraft that's designed around, you know, destroying the enemy. Yeah. Not an aircraft that's designed to be like a news copter. So like if something goes wrong in that, it's a lot more forgiving. Whereas like if something really goes wrong in a Cobra, you're looking at like seconds to try and like
make a decision,
make it better, and it's still not going to be a good outcome. So like knowing those things is very important, and that's what you focused on at the FRS, was like those things. And then as you got towards the end of the FRS, they're like, oh yeah, by the way, like, here's your NATOPS that you had, like that's 500 pages. We also have, you know, these 4 tactics manuals. You have to learn about all of the threats that are out in the world to this aircraft. You have to learn about how all of the ground units fight so you can integrate with them. Like all of those things start to get stacked on. Yeah. And that's when it becomes like you're no longer flying the aircraft. And you're by no means at the point where you're like a master of flying anything, but you're no longer just like flying. You're fighting the aircraft once you get towards the end of that course.
Okay,
so
that's pretty sweet. Was it more so for that school? Was it more about like tactics and stuff at that point, because you already understand, like you understand the basics of flying an aircraft? You know, you understand the theory behind it. You understand all that. So are you starting to work more towards Cobra specific tactics, or are you like, you know, if you want
you're learning the Cobra specific flying.
Okay.
So you're doing the things like, you know, you have your basic FAM flights. You learn to fly the Cobra in the clouds. You do formation flying in a Cobra, and then you learn all the weapon systems. So like you're not going out and shooting for like JTACs like, you know, we used to do all the time, but you're going out and being like, okay, there's a bunch of different ways to get rockets and guns and Hellfires off of this aircraft. What are they? So you're going out and doing those kind of flights. And then at the end of the FRS package, you have like one tactics flight, which looking back on it, you're so stressed out about it. You're like, oh, this is going to be so intense. And like now looking back at it, you're like, I can't believe that I even worried about that.
That's
thing,
like TACP
you know?
school.
Yeah.
They're like, you're going to have to do this attack. Your aircraft's checking in 30 minutes. And you're like, oh my God, what will I do?
Yeah, I remember being so worried about it. I was like, man, I have to do good on this flight. Otherwise, nobody in the fleet's going to want me. And like, you got to remember, you're just with an instructor that knows that you have no fucking clue what's going on, and they throw like a simple problem at you, and you just go out and do it, and then you're done with the.
Are all your flights with instructor pilots?
Yes.
Are there ever like just like a section, and there's like one instructor within the section?
No, we did in flight school at both primary when you're flying the T-34, and when I was flying the T-57 or TH-57, you would do the T-34s by yourself. You did 5 or 6 solo flights, and then in the 57 we would call it girl on girl when you go out and fly with your boy, but you would never do it, you know, solo.
Okay.
So, and then you didn't fly without an instructor in the Cobra until you got out into like actual fleet unit for the most part. There were a couple guys who would do it once they had like graduated school and they were still stuck at the training command. But it wasn't a
just
very,
kind of treading water until they got their orders.
It wasn't a very common thing.
So once you were starting to get to the end of your flight school there at Camp Pendleton, were guys like, oh, this is the unit I want? Was like the rumors coming down, like what units you want to go to? Like, this is the best one to go to, this is the worst one to go to. And were you all like jockeying for like a good unit, or do you even have any say, or is that just all monitor?
So the way that, I mean, there are good and bad units. We can leave it at that.
I mean, we're the hardest people on ourselves. Like, we say there's bad people, but in general, like, they're actually not too bad, but compared to everybody else, they're horrible.
Exactly, right? And that's what I'm saying. We can leave it at that. And so, like, there are units you want to go to, and there are units that you don't. Like, there's one unit that, like, their motto is, we hate each other, but we hate you more.
I was just telling somebody about that yesterday.
Like, I mean, and for me, there's no... I'm not even from that unit, but I mean, like, there's no better way to describe a Cobra pilot. Like,
you're
no
all
better
assholes.
way, I mean, they're assholes, but they're just like, if you want something done, it happens.
I remember going up to. I was in 29 Palms in 2013, maybe into 2012. I was out there for my advisor team workup, and we were at the Warrior Club, out there at whatever that camp was, and we're sitting there drinking, and there's on the corner of the bar, there's a group of Cobra pilots over there. And you see them. They're all in their leather jackets. They're all just, like, looking pissed off, looking around at everybody. And I'm like, bro, I'm a new JTAC. I'm going to be working with these guys. What's up? So I, like, walk over there, and I'm like, hey, what's going on? My name's Sergeant Kramer. I'm one of the JTACs. And they're just like, yo, what's up? Like, why are you talking to us? And I'm just like, yeah, fuck these dudes. Like, they were total dicks. And then I went over, and it's funny because... Emilio, we didn't realize this till to the end of the MEU. That's where him and I met. He was a new Harrier pilot. I met him at the Warrior Club with my advisor team, and we were talking and stuff. And I think they made him, because he was the new guy. He was one of the new guys. They were like, the senior Harrier pilot's like, hey, you have to buy a keg for the entire bar. And like, the Harrier guys are super cool. So I was like, man, fuck those fucking Cobra guys. Like, the Harrier guys are way cooler. Yeah. But you are a bunch of dickheads.
We are. Yeah. You did tell me one time, and you were like, Archer, out of all the Cobra pilots, you're the least biggest dick that I've ever met. Which I think that was the best.
Are you sure I said that?
I ever got. Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny though. But so, did you have a specific unit you were hoping to get? And did you get it?
So the way that it worked for us is, I mean, this was still in the OEF, like, Afghanistan was still hot, right?
Yeah.
And because the West Coast Cobras were the only ones that had the new targeting system and the new Hueys, because the old Hueys were still being flown on the East Coast, the West Coast was what was going to Afghanistan. So I knew that I was a West Coast Cobra pilot, and it was just more or less like a stock, like, you graduated and there were 15 spots at Stingers. There were 15 spots at the next squadron, and then after that, right? So the thing with me is I was right at the edge with, like, this one other guy. And it was, is he going to go to Stingers or am I going to go to Stingers? Because the other one's going to Gunfighters. And so I would have been either the last boot at Stingers or the first boot at Gunfighters. Mm. And so, I mean, I am happy, very happy that I ended up at Gunfighters. But at the time, I wanted to go to Stingers because it was like I graduate school, and I'd be like, I graduate school, I am fucking there, like 2.5 months later, like, let's go do this. You know what I mean?
Oh, okay.
So that's what I wanted. I mean, looking back on it, with like the friends that I made and the people that were there and like the leaders that I had, I'm happy that I ended up at Gunfighters.
Probably, I mean, you probably also, so I assume you had a little bit longer time before you deployed your first time then.
Yeah.
So then you probably also gained a lot of experience that you realize, stuff you probably didn't even realize you didn't know yet, Right. Because you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah, because like what would have happened if I would have went to Stingers is my training would have been smashed into like 6 weeks to like have my basic like night vision qualifications and all that, right? Yeah, smashed in, whereas at Gunfighters, it was still smashed in early, but I was the first one to go through. So like, everybody was still excited that there were a new group of boots and everything.
Which is also good. You said you were the first boot, so you were probably like... It's always nice to be like the boot the least amount of time.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Anytime a new guy shows up, you're like, thank God, Jesus.
Yeah, I think I had... Because when we were in the squadron, you used to have to carry the squadron mascot around if you were the boot. And I think I had that thing for... one all-officers meeting on a Friday before I got to pass it off to my buddy, and I was like, thank God I'm not responsible for this.
What was that? What was it?
It was this giant, I don't want to say giant, it's probably like a 2-foot tall wooden carving of like a cobra. I can't remember if it was fighting something. It's probably something somebody picked up in Thailand back in like 1994.
It's just been with the squadron forever?
Yeah, and so like all the... more seasoned pilots would try and steal it from you and everything. So you'd like handcuff it to yourself, when you're walking around with that. But,
did you guys have a squadron vehicle? Like one of the buses?
No, we didn't.
Bummer.
So at that point, but that was mostly in like Okinawa. That was the only time it was still going on by the time I got to the fleet.
They had one, Evil Eyes had one when we were working with them.
Bear made him have one.
So you get to your unit and now it's like, how long were you there before you found out you were going to Afghanistan? And
I knew that I was going to Afghanistan when I showed up to the RAG.
So how long?
FRS.
Oh, okay. How long did you have for your like workup?
I got there in February and I left in the middle of October. So what's that? 8 months.
How was that? How was that as a pilot? Because you've done a ground side workup and stuff too. How was that on the pilot side? Like, okay, here we go.
So like it was super intense, and the way that it worked for me is the first 6 weeks that I was at the squadron, because I was the only one there, right? I was the only Cobra boot in the squadron for like 4 weeks. Mm-hmm. So I showed up and we went to this thing called Gunfighter University, where, remember I told you about all those tactics books?
Yeah, yeah.
We had classes like all day, and they were like, hey, here's your intro to this, here's your intro to this. And I'm like, oh my God. I was like...
Wait, I gotta remember all this?
Like, the fuck did I get myself into, And like you don't realize all of the different things that people can like that the Cobra can do, like all the different missions. And so like we were focusing on CAS because we were going to Afghanistan, right? And so like you're reading the CAS pub, you're reading the naval tactics and techniques and all this stuff. There were like 4 chapters directly related to CAS. And then we had that week-long Gunfighter U, and then that next Monday, I just basically started doing all of my flights. And I was flying Monday through Thursday, because Friday would usually be not a day off. We call it a maintenance day in the squadrons, where they'd like fix everything that all the pilots broke.
Yeah.
To basically make all the stuff, try and make
ruin
all the
the
stuff
maintainers
work again.
Friday.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. So you did that, and then... when did you push off to Afghanistan?
So I went in the middle of October in 2011.
2011.
So I actually, because I had I pretty much had all of my, like, I think they call them like combat qualifications, which is where you learn to fly at night. And the big things with night vision goggles, if you know, is the difference between highlight and low light level. Mm-hmm. So the big thing going to Afghanistan is if you have your low light qualification, you can fly with anybody who is an aircraft commander.
Okay.
If you don't have your low light qualification, then you have to fly with a night systems instructor, which could technically be a bigger burden on the squadrons. They try and get everybody through their qualifications.
That was part of our planning process for operations, because I was there in 2011 also at the same time with 3.6. That was something we had to look at, which at the time in 2011 when I was with 3.6, I was just a fires chief. I worked with Tiger and I worked with another dude that were air officer JTAC, so I learned stuff, but I wasn't a JTAC at the time, so I didn't really fully understand it. But it just kind of blew my mind, though, that there were dudes in country that couldn't fly at night. And I was like, no way. It was mostly on I think for us, when I saw it was mostly like Osprey guys and stuff like that, but I was like, why the fuck are they even here? Like... And maybe you can shed some light on like why you would even send a guy that can't.
Well, so it's different, right? Like on the ground side, we have somebody who's like, air quotes, JFO qualified. Like nobody fucking cares.
Yeah.
Like, can you call for fire or can you not? Like, can you safely do this or can you not? Like,
okay, yeah.
It's different. in the like flying community, because if you don't have your low light qualification, like, not saying that when you do your 6 or 7 flights to get your low light qualification, you're by any means like super skilled at flying at night, but you have the experience, whereas like you need that experience. Like, it's a very, very difficult thing to fly on night vision goggles. You know,
no,
you need that qualification for like safety.
I respect the call. You know, like, hey, this dude can't do it, so we just can't do it.
Yeah.
But I was just like, this is blowing my mind that we're trying to do an operation and we can't find a dude that can fly at night to do it.
That was one of the things that like blew my mind when I went to become a JTAC, you know, like 5 years down the road. Because it was like, oh, you know, we have to get all of these quals. And then, you know, my chief was like, well, we don't need all these quals. The only thing that really matters is JTAC. Yeah. You know, the other stuff is just, you know, like, nice to have. And I was like, what do you mean nice to have? I was like, you either have it or you don't, and you can do it or you can't. Which is, that's how a lot of pilots look at things, because of
the air side is way more strict on their. And I was telling guys about that. I was like, dude, our TNR, like, we have our TNR manual, and it's more like these are the things we should probably do. Yeah. When on the air side, it's like, these are the things you're going to fucking do. Like, you have to do these things. And if you don't, then you're not doing these things.
Right. And then if you don't have those qualifications, you can route waivers, right?
Yeah.
And so, but you're accepting, like, a massive amount of risk. And so, like, if you remember on the MEU, I made some of the COs sign waivers. Because I was like, oh, if you want to make this guy a qualified JTAC, like, I am willing to sign off on his qual if you are willing to accept the risk.
That he didn't do these 1, 2, and 3.
And so you could do that stuff on a flying squadron too, but that's
way less.
It's just not, you know, it doesn't happen that much.
So you got to Afghanistan 2011 October timeframe. That's not a bad time to really get there. You're coming towards not the end of the fighting season. You're about the last third of the fighting season, because it's, you know, it's pre-winter time and stuff like that. So you guys obviously had activity and stuff. When you were there, where were you based out of? At Leatherneck or Dwyer?
So, before we get into actual Afghanistan, I want to talk about how I actually got to Afghanistan. So,
okay.
I went to go do my pre-deployment leave, all of that stuff, and then I come back from my pre-deployment leave, right? And this was on a Monday, and I was talking with my boss, and he asked me a question. He's like, so, are you ready to go this Friday? And I, like, laughed at him, and I was like, no, I'm leaving in 2 weeks. He was like, no, you're definitely going this Friday. And I was like, oh, you gotta be kidding me. And then I looked at him, and I was like, I need the keys to your truck right now. And he looks at me, and he was like, oh my God, you gotta be fucking kidding me. And I was like, no, I have to go empty my house. And he was like, you son of a bitch. And he gives me the keys, and I went and I grabbed 2 of my friends, and I was like, you guys flying today? Like, no. I was like, great, we're putting me in storage. And
how did you not know you were leaving then?
We get the dates mixed up. It was because the way that I went over, I didn't go with the entire squadron. I flew in the back of a C-17 with some of our helicopters that they put in there.
Okay, that was a question I was going to ask, if you guys brought yours or if they just kept.
I want to say that we did a rotation where you had to bring a third of your own aircraft, something along those lines, maybe a quarter of your own aircraft, and then they would send a quarter of the ones that were there back.
Okay.
And so I was the one that was in the back of the C-17 with these helicopters. And we just get it confused between the 14th and the 21st of October. I thought I was leaving on the 21st. Turns out it was the 14th. So go back, empty out the entire house, and I'm just like, oh my God, this is not happening, you know, because I had, at this point, you know, a couple of days to figure all my stuff out. So I had to call my parents and be like, hey, so you're not coming out this weekend. Like, I'm leaving, and you know, talking to everybody, and I had my stuff bought that I wanted to bring with me, you know, like my t-shirts and all of that shit, but I didn't have any of this stuff packed, right? So I finally get everything sorted, moved out. I get my car stored, all of that shit. And so I basically had this pile on the floor of the house that I was living, which was right on the beach. And I was leaving on a Friday morning. This was on a Thursday night. I get back from work, and my 2 roommates were having their wet down out in the backyard. And
you were working the day before you deployed?
Yeah.
Bummer.
So I did my pre-deployment leave and all that, and then you come back and you get those days.
Yeah, that's
when
right.
When you say working, like I was closing out stuff.
Yeah,
whatever.
okay.
But so they're having their wet down, and their whole squadron is out on my deck. So
Jesus.
as I'm packing my stuff, I'm running outside and hitting this ice luge, just turn into a train wreck, right?
What was your favorite ice luge drink?
I don't know, whatever was going
whatever
down.
was hitting.
Yeah,
whatever was hitting.
So because I was sitting there, I was like, "This is great. I'm not going to be able to drink again forever," and did that whole thing. And run inside a pack, go run out and hit the ice luge, chug a beer real quick, and so I finally get everything packed up. I slept on my air mattress, and then woke up the next morning pretty much like underwater. Like, where am I? Get in the shower, get all my stuff to base, and I'm
worst hangover ever.
Hopped on the C-17, and I will never forget. I opened my computer up to start playing all my at a hard drive with everything
movie or
on
whatever.
Open it up, plug the hard drive in. It was like, this hard drive is corrupted. And then I watched the C-17 door close, and I was just sitting there sweating. And the staff sergeant next to me goes, "We're going to be on here for 17 hours, sir." And I was just like, "I hate you."
Did you fly straight to Afghanistan, or did you guys stop in? Because normally you stop in Kyrgyzstan and stuff like that.
Yeah, so we flew to Dover because they had to pick something up for something else.
Yeah.
And then we flew through Dover to, I want to say it was Spangdahlem in Germany, and then we spent the night in Spangdahlem because that was a total of 13 hours.
Oh.
And then sat there. Great Chinese joint in Spangdahlem Air Force Base.
You got to go out in town?
It wasn't out in town. It was on the base. It was a Saturday night, and there was nobody there. So we found the one place that was open. It was a Chinese place.
Nice.
Went and had some dinner. Woke up the next morning and flew directly into Bastion. And because because we had the helicopters and stuff, we didn't do any of the holding time. So I basically walked off the plane, and we're on the skid flight line.
Ready to go.
Yeah.
So you got there, were you advanced party then, since you were bringing your aircraft?
Yeah, so our advanced party got there, I think, the same day that I did. So
okay.
Yeah.
And for those that don't know, Bastion, and if you've heard of Camp Leatherneck, kind of interchangeable. They're connected. It's like a half British, half American base. And if you want to even call it that, I mean, to me, it's all American. There's a foreign section of it, that has all the Swedes and Norwegians.
I would say the Dutch had a Pizza Hut.
There was the Blue Cafe or something that sold steaks. I remember.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. That whole food court.
I remember coming, dude. I came out of Marja. We're nothing but dudes, and we're eating MREs. And then
all of a sudden, you get this 5'11" blonde chick.
I get on this bus, and I'm I take it over to that side, and I'm like, what the fuck is this? And it's the evening time, so there were people in civvies. They were on dates. This was a place you could go and get a steak and a near beer. People were paying for near beer, and outside they had a movie playing, and I'm like, what the fuck? Completely different than what I was. Where I had just come from, where we were literally eating. We had a point where what were those rations called? Where you first strikes,
T-rats?
First strikes, where you get
a
a clear plastic bag and the entire meal. I don't know what happened with our food in Marja, but there was a point in time where for 1 month all we had was first strikes, and there's only 2 of those. There's a chicken.
When they were testing them.
There's a chicken one and there's a tuna one, and then besides that, it's full of bread and bullshit. And I just remember starving out there, and then I get to Bastion, and I'm like, they have ice cream and a steakhouse. And what the hell is going on here? There's women here. You could smell the women's shampoo from literally 100 yards away.
Yeah,
when you haven't been around.
You're like a hunting dog,
dude. It's so weird, but anyway. So you got to Bastion, and then. How was the turnover with the other squadron?
It was good. I mean, by that point in time,
who'd you turn over with?
So I was HMLA 369.
Okay.
And we turned over. So I was with Gunfighters, HMLA 369. We turned over with HMLA 267 Stingers.
Okay.
So I mean, it was I mean, there were hiccups with everything. Whenever you're doing left seat, right seat, but it's a well-oiled machine at this point, because most of the guys that were like our senior instructors that were running the squadron had done like serious Iraq combat. They'd already been to Afghanistan. So this was more of like a, hey, we have better shit here. You know, like this is a nicer space. Like this is where everything is because we have better connectivity. This is how you work with higher headquarters. Like it was a lot of that stuff. It wasn't like, this is how you fight here. You know, it's pretty much had been.
That's already done. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I want to say I honestly think the air side does a better job of like planning, like, and I think it's because of the the natural. If you fuck up, you're crashing your helicopter. You know what I'm saying? And I think it's it's based in that. But overall, I think the air side does a better job of like planning and like getting planning done also.
Yeah.
Like, what are we sitting here talking about?
It's
nothing.
an SOP.
Let's just get it done.
For me, I always looked at it as an SOP, right? So a standard operating procedure. Like, the ground side has SOPs, but they feel the need to brief them and change them every time they do something, right? The air side...
That's why the enemy can't figure out our tactics.
So the air side, like, we have SOPs, and, like, so if somebody shoots at you in a helicopter... there's a specific action that you do.
Yeah, you live by it.
So like, you do that. And, like, everybody knows that. And that filters its way out into everything that you do. Like, there's a specific way that you handle CAS and how you plan for a mission or how you handle, like, an escort.
Yeah.
And so, like, you have those SOPs. So when you're learning all this stuff, right, when you're back in CONUS, you're learning how to do this and you brief it super in depth. And, like, the instructors get in your shit. Like, if you don't understand it, right? And then so by the time you get over to Afghanistan, everybody's like, hey, we're doing an insert into, LZ whatever. These are where all the threats are. Does anybody have any questions? And then you're like, nope. And then you just go get in a helicopter and do it. So it's like it's beaten into you to a certain point where, like, you don't need to ask all those questions and everything.
So I think it's the same situation with, like, your basic Marine rifleman. Like, your boot 0311 knows, like, hey, I go in this building, this is what I'm doing. I'm going this direction. Or I come out of the track, I'm going this direction, and I'm doing this. Or I'm coming off the bird, I'm doing this. So, I don't know. I think, overall, I don't know. I think we do a pretty good job of that. But, anyway, so you got to Afghanistan, you were there, you did your turnover. What areas did you operate in mostly? All of Helmand, obviously.
Everything. Okay. All of Helmand. So,
did you support only Marines, or did you do Army also? Did you help the other forces?
We support everybody that was in. I forget whatever the AO or whatever the task force was over there. We supported everybody.
Okay.
From, like, down to the Fishhook all the way up into, like, Kajaki, Sofala, Kajaki Dam. Yeah. And then north of that a little bit as well, depending on who we're working for.
What was your most kinetic area? What's the most work you guys got?
By the time that we showed up, Sangin was...
Sangin, man. Lovely Sangin.
Well, Sangin was... I don't want to say it was, like, done, but it was very quiet.
It was dying down.
Yeah, there would be some times where, like, a lot of the stuff that we would work for around there would be with, like, SEALs or MARSOC doing some, like, raids and stuff, And then, I would say, while we were there, they pushed into Zamindawar.
Okay.
Which was just kind of like left alone forever. And then it was the RCT security area. And then they were like, hey, we need to go get some in there. And then so they started running some missions into there. And there were a lot of guys that shot up there. I never did, but it was pretty kinetic out there because you'd have dudes that are like going into a village that hadn't been patrolled in since, like, maybe the Brits were there in 2005 or whatever. So, like, you were catching a lot of guys off guard, and it was a lot more like of a gunfight versus an IED area up there. Yeah, because there was nobody.
Which is what we prefer.
Yeah, exactly right. But there was nobody. They didn't have that, like, built-in IED belt. It was more of a.
It was their rear area for the enemy, basically.
Exactly.
So, what was the first area that you ever shot around?
Mine was at Musa Kala because we were standing a strip alert, what a strip alert is you have, like, our main operating base was Bastion, where the whole squadron was, and because Helmand Province was so big, we would send out like debts. So we had a maintenance debt at FOB Edinburgh, which is now gone. R.I.P. Love that place, but
I never made it. Never made it there.
So we would fly up there in the morning on the 8 to 8 shift. So you'd show up at 8.
We had when I was there in 13, we had a group that came up to Shukvani and sang in.
That was Shukvani took over for Eddie.
Okay.
So they demolished Eddie when they were pulling back, and they were moved to Shukvani.
They'd bring in the Cobra. They'd bring in a Cobra section and a Black Hawk for medevacs.
Yep.
That way you'd stay within the golden hour.
That's what Eddie was. So it was a roll 1. Was roll 1 the highest? I don't know. Whatever the
I think roll 1's the highest, but I think Bastion was a roll 2, which was the highest in the area.
This was the highest next to Bastion, so they could do everything to stabilize somebody, and then they would get sent back to Bastion to basically.
So they had all the pre-surgery stuff,
right?
Okay,
yeah. So you'd stand strip alert. They'd fly up at 8 in the morning, and then there would be a dust off section of 60s that was permanently stationed there. We flew out and back every day.
Okay,
and then we'd be there from 8 to 8 on strip alert, like. Waiting for either medevacs or TICs, which are troops in contact. Yeah. So
what was the first time you got called up for an engagement?
So the first time I got called up for engagement was from Eddie. We just spun up to go home, and there was one gunny who was like, "Hey, I think I got something for you," and they'd found some IED in placers. I don't know, about 20 miles south, and we were getting to the point where we needed to have an extension from our higher headquarters to go do this, and we were like, "Hey, man,
What do you mean by an extension?
You have a 12-hour.
So you were there for 8 to 8. You were scheduled 8 to 8,
right?
And you felt this was going to.
And we knew it was 7:30. We knew it was going to take us a half hour to get home. We're like, "Hey, man, you want us to roll? We need an extension." He was like, "All right, I'll work on it." And so we just took off, and we were like, "Well, it's probably going to get approved." And then right as we were
I don't think it was that hard to get something like that
approved. It wasn't, especially at that time. If you found if you were going for an extension, you knew it was going to get approved because it was for the right thing. You weren't doing it just to do
we weren't bringing you there to do a route.
Exactly. I wasn't coming by for a motivational show of force because you guys were stuck with first strikes. But so we took off out of there, and the way that this was working was it was for the good old Georgians. So it was actually for an ANGLICO team. And they'd found these guys. They were digging an IED on one of the main supply routes. And they were like, "Hey, we got these guys on the G-Boss, which is the blimp with the camera on it." And they're like, "We've got them." And they're like, "We need you to stay out of earshot so you don't spook these guys." And we're like, "Okay." But the way that our weapons work, we need to actually acquire the target to laze for a Hellfire.
Yeah.
Whereas, they can't do it with the G-Boss, right? So we're trying to play that dangerous game of how far out do we have to stay, but how close can we get to, not scare these guys, right?
Skids, the sound of rotors, that was I think that put more fear into the insurgents than anything else.
Oh yeah.
I just caveat real quick. I remember doing shows of force with Harriers and stuff like that. Listening to the guys, listen to the Taliban on the radio because we had their frequencies, and the commanders would be radioing down and be like, "Hey, don't do anything. Just stay in the tree line. They're not actually going to shoot you. They're just doing a show of force." But when skids would come in, dudes were they would move out of the area because they knew because you guys could just hover right there and find these dudes and pick them off. So
yeah,
I just want to caveat real quick. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, that was it's good to point that out. But,
just the sound of rotors because they know that's where the Hellfires come from.
Oh, and plus, back in the day, the old whiskey Cobra used to thump, and that thing sounded fierce.
Yeah,
but
I like it.
New one sounds like a lawnmower. But so we were playing that game of trying not to get too close, and then we were sitting there and we can't find these guys. And then the way that it worked is the Huey actually had a better night sensor.
Because they had the Yankees at that time, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
And so we had an upgraded FLIR so we could see at night, but the Hueys had a better FLIR, so they could pick these guys up better.
So for the people that don't understand, at this point in time, the Marine Corps had the Whiskey and the what was the
Yankee?
No, the Huey before the Yankee.
November.
They had the Whiskey and the November. That's right. And then the Hueys were upgraded before the Cobras. So for a little bit of time, they had upgraded sensors, they had upgraded motors. They were actually faster than the Cobra for a little bit. And that's what, obviously, they got pushed to Afghanistan. So you were probably one of the last whiskey squadrons, right, to go to Afghanistan? Or one of?
No, that was, no.
Okay.
They upgraded all of the Zulus on the West Coast. So they upgraded the Cobras to the Zulu on the West Coast, and then the East Coast picked up the mission in Afghanistan just because they were already there.
Okay. I just wanted to point out the fact that, like, at that time, the Yankee was it had been upgraded first, had a better sensor, was a little bit faster, and then you guys got the upgrade later on. So that's why they were... Did you guys always... Oh, here, how about this? When you guys would go out, did you mostly go out as a Cobra Pure, or did you do mixed section, or was there a preference? It was just like...
No, so this is good. We should have brought this up a little bit earlier. So the way that the squadron deployed at the time was there were 18 Cobras and 9 Hueys.
Okay.
So you would have some... I want to say our daily lineup was... We were broken down into shifts, right? So morning and afternoon. And in the morning and the afternoon, you would have 1 pure Cobra section and then 2 mixed sections, I want to say.
Okay.
And then, like, it was maybe something like every 3rd or 4th day, instead of having 2 mixed sections, you would have another pure Cobra section just because of the way the aircraft worked.
Yeah.
Right? And then we would also have that shift that I was talking about, that 8 to 8, which was always a mixed section.
Okay.
Because we would move people back and forth.
Yeah, you did administrative movements and stuff too.
So, because we would always, like, unless we were going to shoot at the end of the day, we would bring somebody to and from Fob Eddy for our squadron or whoever.
What did you personally prefer, Cobra Pure or mixed?
Ooh, you get me into trouble with this.
Cobra guys are like, you better not fucking say.
I mean, it really depends, like, what were you doing, right? I mean, there are times where, like, we would check on station and you're rolling into a troops in contact and you're like, gunfight, let's go. Like, we don't have to stay 7 to 8 kilometers away, and I don't have to just, like, hover here and, like, be a missile pig for the Huey. When you're, like, in the shit, like, hell yeah, I want 2 Cobras in there. Because, like, I want stabilized guns and I want rockets that are accurate to shoot by those people. You know what I mean? On the ground.
You didn't use a grease pencil on the windshield?
And I'm not taking anything away from the Hueys, because there are guys that are great at close air support that are doing that too. But if you're talking strictly from, like, a weapon perspective, like, I mean, you're going to want a stabilized gun and a better targeting system when you're talking about aiming rockets, in comparison to, like, and then there's other benefits of having the Huey there too. I mean, like,
more guns, you got guns on both sides of it,
right?
Plus
and like
rockets.
there's different ways that they can cover you as you're pulling off. And I mean, in Afghanistan, the ideal team was the Huey and the Cobra.
Yeah,
I mean, that's what it was, because you could do anything at that. I mean, anything.
Is that what you had on your first engagement?
Yes. So, and we probably wouldn't have shot on the first engagement if it wasn't for the Huey, because, like, they found us and, like, the jig was up, and they didn't find us. They heard us.
Yeah.
And like, I will never forget, like, it was either the FAC on the ground that we were talking to, or it was over the interflight in between the 2 helicopters. Like, hey, I think we're getting a little bit too close, and, like, you could see the dude turn around in the FLIR and then, like, kind of like a pause, and then they hopped on the bikes and started driving away, and they basically hit the Musa Kela Wadi, which anybody who's ever flown there, like, Musa Kela Wadi is huge, and I think it was on the the west side, and they basically just started ripping through this wadi, and
on their motorbike?
Yeah.
On their little...
And so what we thought there were 2 of them, there were 4, and they hopped on 2 bikes.
Oh, okay.
So we had already had our 9 line and everything. We're like, hey, they just left. Like, you want to do this or not, more or less. And then we basically came around and lined up and got in like the proper like degree cone that we needed to shoot.
Yeah.
And like I was talking about the Huey, they were able to pick them up because the way that we turned around, my sensor broke lock on them, and like trying to find them in the middle of the night was like next to impossible.
Yeah.
And so like they
was this a built up area?
No, it was in the middle of a wadi.
Okay.
So anybody who knows anything about like,
I never went up to Musa Kela, so I'm not really familiar.
But if you know anything about like heat signatures or stuff, like when you're talking about a wadi where there's a place that there is a little bit of water but not really, it's 8 o'clock at night in October, like the heat signature is just
hard to pick up.
Like
so you were in that crossover time.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Right in thermal crossover, you're trying to find it, and so they put the pointer on it, and I like matched the pointer, IR pointer, which you could see on the goggles, and so basically the Huey had them, and then we got the cleared hot. We shot the Hellfire off of our aircraft, and the Huey was lasing, and over the radio, they were like, I heard like something, and I remember the guy that I was flying with, great dude, he was like, oh, huh.
This is your first engagement.
Yeah, and I'm like sitting there, and I was just like, oh, all right, you know, I'm like trying to pick all this stuff up, because I mean, like me in the front seat, I'm like, just select the right fucking missile. If you shoot the wrong missile, nobody's ever going to like you again. Like, just shoot the right goddamn missile. That's all you have to do.
You will never live this down, and they're going to change your call sign.
And so I remember I shot it, and I looked out, and I was, yes, the right one came off. And so it went in the air, and so it hit, and they were like, hey, the other bike's getting away. We're going to put the pointer on it. We want you to shoot it with 20.
Were you self-lasing?
No, it was the Huey.
Okay, so the Huey was just...
The Huey lased it. And,
nice, okay.
So like,
you were fire and forget. That's nice.
Yeah. And so the whole time I'm trying to like find where the impact is and everything, and we couldn't find them, and just because the thermal crossover is crazy. And we basically, the Huey put the pointer on the other bike, and then we just basically went nose on with the Cobra, and then started shooting 20 like at the pointer, because there was nobody else around. It was in a wadi, right?
Yeah.
So we were just, the other guy got away, and so like at that point we were like, hey, you know, we got one, we're 1 for 2, and then I will never forget, it was the dude's like, hey, we're leaving tomorrow. Just, you know, we're down here, and this is the first control that we had. Hey, you guys have fun. Like, thanks. And I was like, cool, man. This was my first control.
This is mine too, bro. It's cool. So that's funny. Like, the crazy thing is when I was down in Marja, we had a Cobra. We had 2 guys on a motorbike. I remember we had 2 guys on a motorbike cruising. They had just fired on some guys. I can't remember. And we had I think it was Cobra Pure section came in, and one of them shot a Hellfire at the motorbike as it was cruising along. I guess it hit just short of the motorbike, but it looked like a good hit on the feed, you know? Yeah. We're like, oh, good hit. Boom. Got him. And the dust kind of clears, and you see like one dude had jumped off the motorbike and run next to it, like as it had blown up. And another dude was like laying there, and the dude that had like jumped off, like got himself up and started running. And then we brought in the other Cobra for a gun run, and he started just doing guns because it was next to a compound. So I don't think we did rockets. I think that's what it was.
Yeah.
And it was like a Rambo movie. We were watching it on the blimp, which is a really great feed. I mean, it's like almost a high def feed.
They have like a Bright Star on those things, right?
I don't know the actual optics or whatever, but it's a really good feed. And I just remember, and it was more the angle of it. It wasn't like a Predator feed where you're looking down. It was almost more like you're looking at the dude. So you can see this guy running, and it looked like a freaking Rambo movie where this dude is running, and you just see the rounds blowing up all around him from the Cobra, and then just like this big dust cloud, and then he breaks through the dust, like sprinting through it, like, ah! And I'm like, no fucking way did he live through that. We tracked that dude for like 30 minutes, ended up getting away. His other buddy, the one that we thought was dead off the motorbike, apparently he was just knocked out. Afghan National Army dudes came to pick him up. They threw him in a wheelbarrow, because that's, you know, how they move bodies around out there for whatever reason. And as they picked him up, he like came back to life. He woke up and came to and did his thing. But yeah, it's just and the only reason I bring it up is like the effects aren't what I don't think. Like before you're in the military, you're like, oh, missiles, yeah, hit somebody, it kills them. But in real life,
what's crazy when you think about
it'll probably kill them, but maybe not.
When you got to think about where you're at in Afghanistan, right? You're shooting a lot of like farming areas.
Yeah.
So you've got that soft soil.
Yeah, especially down at Marja.
Yeah. So every round that's coming off a Cobra is designed to kill a tank or at least an armored vehicle.
Yeah, so it's punching.
Right. So it punches into that dirt and that dust. And so it may not explode or it'll explode further down. So you're not going to get the desired frag pattern of stuff. So like even with you put the blast sleeve on a Hellfire.
Yeah.
Like even if that might blow up underground. You know what I mean? So.
Well, for the gun, you guys didn't change out like the loadout of the gun to change it so you're not going to shoot API.
What did we have?
If you know that's a problem, like it's going to soak into the ground, the ground's going to absorb a lot of the effect.
Right, but I mean, when you're talking with a gun there, you're talking about like you have to hit them.
What was it? What were you shooting with on the gun? Was it API and tracer, or
I think it was API. Yeah, or HEI.
HEI,
yeah,
high explosive incendiary. For those that don't understand what
and then
saying.
the Hueys, but I mean, like again, even it doesn't matter what kind of bullet you're shooting at those guys there. Like I mean, you're gonna have to hit them.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. No, there was definitely a lot of guys that I remember seeing a guy. There was an IED in placer. He put in the IED. We shot a Hellfire. I want to say it was off a Reaper, maybe. I don't remember. We shot a Hellfire at this guy, and actually we shot a Hellfire at his buddies first. Took out 3 dudes, and he was like walking up. This was like the lone dude that was like he had been over here doing. He was probably the boot. He was over here doing the rest of the work, and the other dudes were hanging out. So he's finishing up what he was doing and walking back over to these guys, and he's walking over. Boom! They all get hit by a Hellfire, so it had to have been a Reaper. And then he's like, oh shit! He took off running the other way. And then so we watch him run for a little bit. We let him run for like a kilometer. Shoot another Hellfire at him. And you know how they can hear it right before it hits. This guy heard it and just like put his head down and sprinted. And took like 6 like massive like sprinting steps. And the Hellfire hit behind him and blew into his back. And he ended up living. He had to like come in and medevac him. Because, but...
We had the same... We had a couple of attacks that went the same way where they would hit 2 or 3 feet behind people as they were running and like blow them into the air. Yeah. And then they would continue going and then they would die like 30 minutes later. Yeah. Because the adrenaline would just like keep them going. Yeah. So then they would go do the BD or BD.
It's crazy when you see it on the sensor because it all whites out, and it's just like boom. You're like, oh shit, like oh got him, like that dude's gone, and then you're like, wait, no, he's not, he's gone. Like, oh man,
not everything's a 500-pound bomb.
I saw a guy live through 2 500-pound bombs land on him, and both of them looked like they were direct hits. There were 2 guys. First one hit, we're like boom, like oh got him. Like, that was it. And then it cleared up, and we see the 2 guys running away from where the bombs just hit them. And then brought the aircraft back around, dropped another one. One dude was dead. The other dude crawled away. Like, we watched him, like, crawling, and he ended up getting away. Like, before we could fucking do anything.
Probably went straight to Vegas and put it all on black.
Let's hope so. But, so how many engagements do you think you did on your first deployment?
Not that many. Probably
a lot of route scans.
Yeah, a lot of route scans. I would say like when you're talking like shooting, I would say 10, and then suppressive fire, which we can cover in a little bit, was probably half of that. When you're talking about like I am going at the enemy to make him stop, I would say between 4 and 5.
Okay.
So
when you did that, what was your normal? Was it normally Hellfire followed up by rocks and guns, or was it normally you roll right in a gun, or it just varied depending on the situation?
Every single one was different. I mean, like we had a standard template for how we shot rockets and guns that we had like a tour with all the air officers. Like this is how we do it, and so like that was what everybody was expecting. But I mean, most of the time it would be Hellfire followed by gun, and just because when you're talking about like. Again, like the gunfight, right? You're 50 kilometers. That'd be a little bit further away. 50 meters away from somebody. like you're trying to either drop a room of a building or like a cellar of something, and then you're just trying to like follow up and punish like that portion to make sure that that was it, you know what I mean? But I've also had like I shot rockets at Carezes, you know, on all kinds of stuff. I've shot suppressive fires into fields, like you were talking about the shows of force to try and make people go inside. Like, we didn't have shows of force. We had suppressive fires most of the time, just because like they could already see us. So we would shoot like close to where either we thought they were or like you guys thought they were, as like a deterrent to be like, hey, don't you think about that.
Keep fucking around, bro.
The stove's hot. Don't touch it.
I think I only did one show of force with it was a mixed section. And as they were coming in for the show of force, because I couldn't identify, the problem at that time, I was an Afghan advisor, and the problem was I had a group of Afghans that were huddled in a building somewhere, but they couldn't tell me where they were at. They had 6 dudes had been killed that day, like in this battle. And these dudes were like in a building trying to not be killed. You know what I'm saying? They're like radioing us like, help us, blah, blah, blah. So I couldn't just shoot because I didn't know where the friendlies were, you know, because it was working with the Afghans is super hard. It's not like they have like the GPSs and the maps, and like these dudes are barely being able to read. So to try to teach them how to read a map, we would give them smoke. We'd give them smoke and be like, hey, when I tell you pop this smoke, but half the time you'd be like, hey, pop the smoke, and like you'd see smokes popping up all over the place because all the dudes would start popping smoke. So it was just an issue. But I did a show of force one time, I think, with the mixed section. They came in, and I remember the Huey came in first, and he was coming in, and I heard over because we had the radio where we were listening to the Taliban dudes, and the dude's like, all right, try to shoot down the helicopter. And I was like, hey, what'd I say? I told him, I was like, hey, abort. These dudes are going to try to shoot you down. And they were like, fuck that. We're not aborting. Huey slowed down. Cobra popped. Like, take a shot. It was like they were daring them to do it. They didn't do it, but, you know. But, yeah, shows of force weren't that common with the with skids. But did you do 1 or 2 Afghan deployments?
I just did 1.
You did the 1, and then what'd you do? So when you were coming back from that Afghan deployment, how was that? You're like, all right, now I'm a seasoned pilot. I did my deployment. I'm back to the squadron.
Yeah,
you got the boot drop in.
Yeah, my last flight in Afghanistan, which was awesome, which was one I got to shoot rockets on my aircraft commander flight, in combat, which is pretty dope. Like,
go ahead.
A lot of people don't have to say that. I mean, it was just.
If you want to tell the story,
no, it was like I don't want to say routine because nothing's routine, but it was a routine
attack.
Yeah, insert for I want to say it was a platoon reinforced. It was 3 Ospreys worth of people, so like 60-ish guys.
Wow. So it was a legitimate operation.
Yeah, they were going in, and like this was when we were doing our turnover when we were leaving, and the guy that I was flying with, who was a senior pilot, he was like, I think I want to take the dude from the other squadron just because I want him to see how this works. And I looked at him and I was like, come on, man. I was like, you don't need some boot sitting in the front seat, you know, if something goes
Shit's
crazy.
Shit's gonna happen.
And he was like, you're a boot, and like started yelling at me and all this stuff. It was like, all right, whatever. And then he came back to me
they come back to the we eat ourselves.
He came back to me a couple hours later. He's like, you know what, you're right. Like, we've been flying together for the past 3 months, like, let's just keep it going. And like,
yeah, at that point you're in a good rhythm. Like, you know what the other dude's thinking. You know what he's gonna do. Yeah.
And like, I like this guy. We've grown apart a little bit. I haven't talked to him in probably about a year. But like, I mean, we're going in. These 3 Ospreys go to land, and RPG went in between the nacelle of the lead Osprey and the body of the aircraft. Like, I mean, you're talking about feet away.
Yeah.
From like, we're gonna be here all day, guys. And so like they were like, hey, we just got shot by an RPG, and like I was sitting there and I was like, we need to shoot back. And then was like, no, sorry, you can bleep that out. But he was like, hey, yeah, that'd be something an aircraft commander would do. And he's like, you gonna arm me for gun? And then like I armed him for gun, and he just started like lacing into him. And then we came back around, and I was like, let's fucking go. Like, all right, calmed down, and then because the Ospreys had waved off, and they still wanted to go back. So
this was an op. This wasn't the resupply where the Ospreys got the air medals, right?
Where they got what?
The air medals? You know what I'm talking about? Where they were doing
no, that was after I was gone.
Okay.
So the Ospreys had waved off, and they'd talked to the guy in the back, and he was like, no, we need to go in there. And so then they went to go back in, and what we get to do was shoot suppressive rockets, which is just, I mean...
You prep the LZ.
Yeah, shooting rockets is just amazing.
Yeah?
And, I was sitting there, because I hadn't shot rockets the whole time.
Oh, okay.
In Afghanistan. I was like, this is
pretty
awesome.
What kind of HE and flechette?
We did HE, just because it was like a noise-making deterrent at this point. So, we found like a Carez hole just north of the LZ, and it was like, all right, we're going to shoot north. The Huey's going to shoot, to the other side of the LZ, and then they're going to come in and drop the dudes off and go away. And it was like, hey, put the pointer on the target, puts the IR pointer on it, and I like tipped in, did everything. And like I'd flown a lot of my basic rocket flights with this guy, and so I was like sitting there, I was like, just don't look like an asshole in front of him. And so I tip in.
How ridiculous is it? This is one of your last engagements, and you're still like, I hope I don't fuck up in front of everyone.
Yeah. Well, screwing up in front of your friends is the best punishment, right? And
so you tipped in, and
tipped in. I shot, and then I was like, "How was it?" He was like, "They were okay." And I was like, "What do you mean okay?" And he was like, "Yeah, it was all right, man." So like we pull off, and like we finish our time on station, then we go back, and like we pull the tapes, and I like look, and we're sitting in there. I was like, one of the rockets went in the hole, man.
Yeah, bro, I
was like, it was at night, and I hit the target, and he was like, well, the other one was like 2 feet long, and I was like,
what do you expect?
You gotta be kidding me, man. And so in the shift change brief, he was like, well, these rockets were all right. This one was long. And I was like sitting in the back. I was like, you've got to be kidding me. So you still haven't arrived.
That's how you guys are. That's how the community is.
Yeah.
Oh, you didn't get them both in the hole? Piece of shit. So you came back from that, and then you went to... When did you get selected to go to WTI?
That was... about a year and a half later.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So what will happen in that year and a half time frame?
So they determined that the squadron was going to go back to Afghanistan, but take this, and we'll jump right back in, and we'll figure it out.
All right. So where were we at? We were at
coming back from.
So you got back from Afghanistan. All right. So this may get into the editing. I don't know because we're drinking here. So. If we're figuring out where we're at, you come back from Afghanistan, and now you're probably one of the more senior guys? Because I assume you come back and you lose dudes like every other unit does, or how does that work with the skid side or the air side?
Right, so with the flying unit, back in like the Afghanistan time frame, in the early teens, you're looking at like peer groups, right? So... you'd have a standard 4-year tour at a flying unit, and I would say on average you'd have 3 peer groups within that 4-year tour. So you would lose the senior peer group, which is your WTIs and NSIs, which we'll get to, and then the peer group in the middle on that deployment would be like your section leaders, and then the bottom peer group is like your boots, who are the guys we were talking about earlier that are just night vision goggle qualified.
You.
Yes.
Fucking boots.
Nice. But, so, when we get back, like, for instance, the guy that I did that last mission with.
Yeah.
He basically came back, and I was like, hey, man, do you want to go to Vegas with us? And he was like, I'm leaving Camp Pendleton 3 days after we get back. And
oh, wow.
He basically, like, came back. His shit was either in storage or at his place, and like he had scheduled TMO while he was on deployment, and came back and then went to flight school.
He went to flight school?
Yeah, he went to be an instructor.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So how long are you normally at a squadron before you move on to one of your B billets or?
Between 4 and 5 years.
At this point, though, so okay, so you came back from Afghanistan. How long had you been at the squadron?
I had been in there for a year and a half. So
you were kind of like midway through. I mean, you weren't a boot. You just came back from a deployment.
Right. I was an aircraft commander.
Yeah.
So like I could do any mission that like you needed to in a Cobra, right?
Okay.
So, and if you look back at that time, everybody was looking beyond Afghanistan because they were like, we're moving away from the counterinsurgency fight. So there was a big push towards like, are we always going to be doing CAS? Like, what are these different missions that we can do in the Cobra? So we started putting our training a little bit more towards other things that we could be doing. And then we found out the squadron was going back to Afghanistan. So then it became
back to CAS.
A focus on CAS
Yeah.
almost exclusively.
Okay. So can you talk about the other stuff that you guys do, planning outside of close air support? Which is what CAS means for those that don't know.
Yeah, I mean, when you're looking at it, there's basically, to think of it simplistically, there's CAS and DAS, close air support and deep air support, right?
Yeah.
So close air support, a lot of people get on me because I don't remember the exact definition of it, which you used to have to memorize. It was like a frat. People would just come up to you in the hallway and be like, what's the definition of close air support?
I've always told people that's what a squadron's like. I'm like, it's a bunch of frat dudes running around hazing each other about not knowing some obscure, minuscule piece of information that you should know.
Yeah, but I mean, it requires detailed integration and planning with a ground unit, right? So deep air support is more along the lines of, there's bad guys out there, like, let's go get some. You know? So, and there's different ways that you can do deep air support. There's armed interdiction, where you're going to, like, we have this target. There may be threats that are here and here. Like, how do we get in, shoot it, and get out without being seen? Mm-hmm. Or how do we get in, shoot it, be seen, and then leave? Like, there's a bunch of different things you can do with that, like, depending on what you're trying to do. Armed reconnaissance is just basically, think of it as you're flying up to Baghdad in the initial push to Iraq, and you're like, oh, hey, bunch of tanks. Let's go shoot those tanks.
Yeah.
Like stuff like that. And then there's SCAR, which is supporting... I don't even remember what it is. But it's basically coordinating all of those things that are happening. It's being like...
Something area... Like, isn't it area reconnaissance? Isn't that the AR?
Yeah.
We're both pieces of shit.
I know. I've been drinking and I can't remember.
We've been drinking beer and
I've been working in finance for the past year and a half.
Scumbag.
So, but anyway, it's just like, it's making all that other shit happen. Like, you're the coach.
Yeah. Okay.
Of that, you're like, hey, I have all these targets over here. I want you to go do that, and then I want you to go look at these things.
So you're almost like an air officer, but on the air side.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Nice. So, I think that's the thing that people don't realize, is that our rotary wing, and I don't mean people as in general people, but Marines don't realize that the squadrons aren't just doing CAS. They're doing other missions. There's a lot of other missions that you guys will do. You guys will support. You guys will. I mean, there's inserts with the rotors that you guys go in for security and stuff like that. Like, what do you think is the most dangerous mission that you could be called up to do as a rotary, as a Cobra guy?
Landing at a FARP at night.
Really?
100%.
That's some straight, like, Iran. What was that? What was Eagle Claw?
Yep.
Operation Eagle Claw.
Most dangerous. I have never been scared shitless so many times in my life, landing on goggles out in the middle of the desert in Arizona and California.
Really?
Yes. And
why?
I mean, and it's just...
I've never... You're blowing my mind.
It's because... So think of it, whenever you see a helicopter come down in dust, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. If you come down during the day, it's moderately disorienting, but you still have like a ground reference or like something that you could pick up reference, right? A lot of times when you're coming down at night, low light level, like we were talking about that qualification.
You're straight
earlier,
instruments.
You're trying to land. You're trying to land on instruments. You're trying to follow just basic numbers, and like you want to hit the ground firmly, but you don't want to do it too hard. And then on your night vision goggles, right?
Depth
you're
perception
looking at
is
them
shit.
like we have binos, so you're looking through two paper towel tubes, and you're looking forward, you're looking left, you're looking forward right, forward left. Like I would go forward left all the time.
And you're not like a Huey where you have two crew chiefs hanging their head out the side telling you stuff that they see also.
And for the Hueys, like one of their missions is to like land in the dust. Like I mean, Cobras don't like we land in the dust when we need to go get more rockets and more guns
fuel,
and more fuel, and so like we don't do it that often, and so like it's by far the most dangerous thing we do, and it's by far the way that we have lost more Cobra pilots is doing operations in and around FARPs at like low light level conditions.
I think it was towards the end of my deployment with 3-6. I think we had a Cobra. There was a Cobra. I don't think it was RAO. I think it was a different one, but it was obviously in the whole. It was in Afghanistan. This Cobra landed to. I think it was at a FARP, at a FOB or whatever. And when they went to take off, the skid caught the deck plate, and it killed like the pilot, or it was like really senior. That was one
of my best friends.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, so, my bad. I didn't know.
Yeah. It's whatevs, but
I know they said they did it in the simulator, and they're like, "There's no way." Like what the pilot did was what he was supposed to do. Like, he was in basically a no-win situation.
I mean, they used to use this shit that they would put down at FARPs, which a FARP is, think of it as a gas station in the desert for the people that don't know what it is. It's a forward arming and refueling point.
Yep. Forward arming and refueling
it's point. Where we will land to go get more like rockets, guns, bombs, and gas.
So that was your squadron?
It wasn't my squadron. That was another squadron. Okay. But we went through flight school and everything together.
And then he was obviously a pretty junior pilot, but he was with a super senior guy, wasn't he?
He was flying with their CO.
I thought it was a CO or XO.
I want to say this, But basically they used to use this stuff called Moby matting, which from my I had never used it because after this happened they got rid of it. It was basically at a FARP they would go out and nail like a tarp on the ground to try and reduce the dust.
Oh, okay.
And they lifted off, like one of the stakes I think came out and wrapped around the skid, and so basically they like came up and then came straight down and crashed.
Man.
Yeah.
I mean, those are those, that's those things that like you can do all the planning in the world, and then that one thing you're never going to think about. Like, why would you think about the staking of the tarp is going to come out and wrap around the skid? Because that's what I heard also. It wrapped, like, the skid got caught, and when they pulled up, thinking it would pull them away from the whatever it was, pulled them down, actually. Like, tipped them forward into it.
Yeah, because they did that, and then, yeah. More or less, but... Man. Yeah, and I mean, you're talking about...
Small community. So I'm not surprised you know them, but...
Yeah.
Sorry.
But there's it's that minute before you land and that minute before you're like airborne out of the dust, you're joined up on your lead aircraft again, is awful.
Yeah.
It's just awful.
You're like, I just need to get through this.
I mean, like daytime, I'm like, whatever, let's go do it. But
was that a nighttime landing? That one?
Yeah. All of these things happen at night.
Okay.
So like I can't think of one of them that's happened daytime since I've been in. They all happen at night because I mean just the cues that you get and everything. Like one that I can specifically think of is where two aircraft collided on takeoff out of a FARP. Like,
when was this? I don't remember.
This was in 2012. This was when we were in Afghanistan. It was a squadron who was like prepping to relieve us.
Oh, okay.
I mean, they just basically crashed into each other, taking off out of the FARP, low light. It's just
stateside.
Yep.
So I mean, that tells you right there, like the danger's inherent, just because even in a training environment that happens.
That's why I'm not a pilot anymore, man.
Did it kill all 4 pilots?
It killed. I want to say there were 7 total. 2 Cobra.
How do I didn't...
2 Cobra and 5 on the Huey.
I don't think I've ever heard of this.
So, yeah,
5 on a Huey. Jeez.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was 4 or 5 on the Huey. So.
Yeah, I had so the guy I was talking about earlier, that he was a Harrier pilot. I asked him, I'm like, are you gonna? Because he was my air officer at ANGLICO for Assault Delta, and I asked him, I'm like, you gonna go back and get into the freaking back in the Harrier? And he's like, I don't know, man. And that's what he told me. He's like, dude, every flight you like, in the back of your mind, you think about it at least once. Like, is this the last flight? Like, could something happen on this flight? And he's like, it's great. I love the job. You're a fucking fighter pilot. You're flying a jet. He's like, but the inherent risk of the job, at some point, you're like, okay, I've pushed it a little much, you know. And he had planned on getting out, which is funny. He planned on getting out after our deployment, and he came back on the deployment on ship. The Harrier dudes, he got roped back into the Harrier guys on ship. They'd go on Liberty ports together, and he'd be like, "I'm going out with the Harrier guys." And he came back, and he's like, "All right, I'm re-enlisting as a Harrier pilot." But good on him, man. His squadron went out and dropped a bunch of bombs and did like a bunch of bombs. They were in the one before ours where they set all the record. They were dropping all the bombs. They ran out of like bomb kits and stuff like that. But even he was saying like that's the inherent risk. Like it's always in the back of your mind because something could happen like that. Something that you're not even thinking about, or something that's just. I mean, I don't know. I think in a risky ass job like both of us had, you can plan for as many mitigating. You know, you can mitigate as many things as you can, but you can't mitigate them all. At some point, the law of averages is going to
catch up to you.
Going to catch up to you. So,
but I mean, we'll get to that with my limited reserve time. But
let's bump forward. Where were we at? So you got back, and then now you were a aircraft commander, right? Is that what you said? Aircraft commander. And now at this point, you're working up to being a section lead, probably, or
yeah.
Okay, so you want to talk about that? Like, what's that like to like try to move up in qualifications as a pilot? And this is another thing the Harrier guy was telling me. Every flight is a check in the box. You're being graded on every flight, and that's what he said. He's like, it's just so stressful because every time you go up, it's not just like I'm going up and I'm going to shoot some targets. I'm going to come back, and it was super cool. It's like I'm going to go up, I'm going to shoot some targets, I'm going to come back, and the guys that are senior to me are going to tell me I'm a piece of shit, and I should have done this, and I should have thought about that, and I should have done this.
So we were in this kind of like limbo in that area when we got back, right? We're all aircraft commanders, but so first of all, we started getting new boots, which was just great. I mean, anybody who's been in the military, like when you get a new crop of boots, you're just like, thank God, you know,
thank God.
Like, and for, I mean, it's
probably, like, watch is coming up this weekend. No, I know I'm not doing it.
Exactly. Like, I mean, it's a little bit like in the squadron, it's like, I don't have to keep this fridge full of beer anymore. Like, you know, like shit like that. You're like, oh, thank God. Like, I don't have to worry about this shit. So, but, what we started working for is you needed to have 50 hours from your time where you were designated as an aircraft commander before you could qualify as a section leader. So,
how long does that take to get 50 hours flight time?
It could vary, but I would say if you want to get it, but if the squadron wants you to get it, you could do it in maybe 3 months. Because like at that point in your career,
because they identify their best dudes and start prepping them for follow-on qualifications.
Right. So we were doing a lot of things where that group that was just above us in Afghanistan, who were now getting ready to transition to the top, because that top group had all moved on to their other jobs, right? So that group was getting ready to do their higher level qualifications. So we were flying a lot of girl-on-girl flights with our boys as like -2 for them, to like warm them up, because flying Afghanistan combat is different than flying your qualification flights, because the qualification flights, although you're not shooting at somebody, are way more in depth because they're testing like your entire knowledge of like everything
the understanding
that you could
of the
be
system,
doing, right? So it's not just like you're going out and doing counterinsurgency, which from a aviation perspective is fairly simplistic.
Yeah.
It's more difficult on the ground, right? Because you're just going to tell us shoot this thing, and we're like 90% of the time, let's just do it.
Okay.
So when you go back, you're worrying about, all right, so is the next war going to be us going into some place where we have to fly at 50 feet and like we can only be exposed above 100 feet for 4 seconds before somebody's going to shoot back at us, right? So like
you're talking about higher threat areas for aircraft.
So like we're doing a lot of like -2 flying for that more senior guy who's now getting a more senior qualification, right? So that's a lot of what we were doing at the time, and then that builds our hours to then become section leaders. So I would say that was probably...
That's kind of the workflow for it all?
Yeah, that was probably the first 8 months or so.
How often do you find yourself flying, like, super low to the ground? Because you always see the videos on TV, like, us non-aviators are like, that looks so cool. Like, But I've talked to pilots, and they're like, "That's the scariest shit ever." Like you're just, you're in overload of scanning. You're not only are you have to obviously look at your instruments constantly.
Yeah.
You know, you're doing your scans on your instruments, but now you're looking to like, is there a tall ass tree? Is there a freaking cable line? Is there whatever?
Again, you're talking about night and daytime. Like daytime, Cobra,
no big deal.
Let's go. Like, love it. Flying out in the desert. Doing all that stuff is a lot of fun.
I'm sure the desert's way better than like flying through the mountains.
But I mean, flying through the mountains, as long as you know where the power lines are and you do like a good pre-study of everything, it's fun.
Have you ever been close to clipping a power line or anything?
No, because I would never put myself in those situations. So like if there was a chance that like if I was going low and we were going to be somewhere where I knew there were power lines, I just wouldn't put myself in that situation. It wasn't worth it.
Yeah.
So, but the same time, you throw the NBGs on, and I'm flying around in the desert at 50 feet, and like you get back and you're covered in sweat, and you're just like, wow,
thank God, thank God I made it.
Yeah, like I mean, there are a couple of flights where I was out like in between, like Tucson and Gila Bend, and like those ranges out there, like to the east. And you're like flying, and then there all of a sudden here's some 40-foot cactus, and you're like, "What the fuck?" And then you're just like ripping over it. You're like, "Oh my god!"
That would be insane to get taken down by a cactus.
Yeah, and you're just like, I mean, those are the things like at night. Like, it's fun when you're 26 or 27 and single, and then you go out to do that shit as like a 33-year-old with kids, and you're like, "No,
hey, what the fuck am I doing? What the hell am I doing here?"
Yeah.
So you were back for how long were you back before they were like, "Hey man, we're tapping you to go to WTI"? And then what was that? What was that like squadron workup? And for those that don't know, WTI is the Weapons and Tactics Instructor course at Yuma. So if you've ever seen Top Gun, it's the Marine Corps version of Top Gun. It's like you go there to become the best pilot within that airframe. That's it. That's where you go. That's your top school. So. How long were you back, and kind of what was the workup? Because once they identify, like, hey, we want you to go to WTI, obviously you have to check 100 boxes to make sure you have the pre-quals done.
Yeah, so our squadron was determined that they were going back to Afghanistan, but it was not going to be a full deployment. So they were going to take, I want to say they took like 9 and 9 Cobras and Hueys, like aircraft and personnel wise, right? Okay. So a TO Cobra squadron, or Cobra squad. Of course, it's a Cobra squadron because the Hueys just come along to play. But,
ooh,
it's 18, a little jab. It's 18 and 9. I think they might have changed it to 12 or 15 and 12 or something like that. Anyway, we left a significant remain behind element back, and then we also absorbed another det that had done a 31st MEU, came back to us. So that's where we got our senior instructors. When the squadron left to go to Afghanistan, they came from the 31st MEU.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I actually didn't get tapped to go to WTI right away. There were 2 of us that were going, 2 gingers too.
Fucking gingers,
that we stayed back, and it was like who
soulless bastards.
Yeah. They were like, who do we want to send? The other guy won out. So
other ginger.
Yeah.
Right, we have to send one. It's diversity and stuff.
Yeah. So then they were like, here's your consolation prize. You can go work in maintenance as the quality assurance officer. I was like, this is great. I don't want to do this. I want to go to WTI. So we found out they got another spot to go like open up at WTI because another squadron, there's 8 HMLAs, there's 8 WTI spots every 6 months. So one squadron couldn't send somebody, so we're like, hey, Gunfighters, can you do it? They were like, yes, we will send somebody. And then it came down to me and another guy that they sent back from Afghanistan. And I remember I had already resigned myself. I was like, whatever, I'm just going to be like the maintenance pilot. I'm going to be the guy that's in charge of.
Did you want to go?
I did.
Were you like, I want to go, but he's probably going to get it? Is that what you were thinking?
I wanted. There's a lot of dynamics that go into this, and it's like personality driven, but
everybody I talk to that goes to WTI is like, dude, it's a kick in the nuts.
I didn't want to go because a lot of my role models did not go, And I don't think it was because they didn't have the tools or they didn't want to. But there's a lot of animosity sometimes in that area. Like, the guys that taught me how to fly were not WTIs, but they were great pilots. And they really loved their job. And they were Night Systems Instructor, which is, like, the main qualification you need before WTI.
Okay.
And, you know, so, like, I think a little bit of that rubbed off, and I talked to some of them, and they were like, fuck yeah, you should go. Like, why would you not? Like, do you want to do this for a career? Like, if you were a WTI, like, that's your ticket. And I was like, all right, that makes sense. And so then I was like, let's go. Like, let's do this. And so once I found out that I was going to get the chance to do it, they basically made it a competition. They sent one of my buddies back from Afghanistan to do it. And I went out and did my first, like, 4 flights and stuck them. Like, very, very good flights. And then he didn't do so well.
What did your flights involve?
It was a lot of basic flying because, like, as a night systems instructor, the goal is for you to be able to teach somebody to fly a Cobra at night, right? Okay. So that could be a guy who's never flown a Cobra helicopter at night. So you go out and the instructor basically acts like an idiot and tries to, like, turn you upside down, do all kinds of crazy shit and all this stuff. So, like, you learn how to do that. They make you navigate at night without the GPS, without any references like a TAC-in or...
So what are you using references? Like, just like hard maps?
Like maps, yeah. And so, like, a big thing that they would do is on like a tactical flight where whenever you go out to a range on the west coast, a big thing or big ranges that we go to are the 2507s, which are in I think they're in California. They're at the very eastern part of California. They're on the edge there.
They're like, yeah. Chocolate Mountains.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right on the opposite side of the Salton Sea. So you would basically fly out, you go to El Centro, get gas, fly up, do your time on station, then reverse. So when you're taking off on your NSI, like your first flight, what used to be your 5902, they'd basically, like, pull all of the, like, navigational aids and the GPS, and they would be like, take me to El Centro, which sounds easy enough because, I mean, I could probably still fly there today, but when you're doing it at night on goggles with all this pressure on you, and then they're throwing, like,
you start
all these,
second guessing yourself,
you know, and then they'll start throwing, like, other things, pretending like you're in country and you're going from one base to another, and they're like, do you have the fuel to get to this tick? Can you do this? Like, all those things. So,
okay.
Yeah.
So you got through all that, and they were like, hey, man, okay, you made it. You're going to go to WTI. Were you like, was it like, yes, but at the same time, like, fuck?
Yeah.
Because, I mean, if you're going to WTI, those that don't know, like, if you're involved in that whole process at all, like, if you know you're going, you know you're about to get kicked in the nuts. You're about to show up, and all these dudes there are, like, I mean, I don't know if they're the premier dudes, but they're good at what they do. Like, none of them are bad at what they do.
There is a selection process to go there.
Yeah, so they're all good people, and they're all good at what they... So they're going to call you out on all your bullshit, and any little, like, thing that you thought you could get by with at your unit. And I'm speaking strictly on the JTAC side. They're going to call you out on it, and they're going to make you be better at it or just remove you from the course. And I know, I've heard about the layouts and all the bullshit on the Cobra side. So for a community that, you know, eats itself, what was it like to go to WTI?
It was just wild. I mean, it was like what you think of. I mean, and I went through in 2013. I don't know how it is now, but it was what you think being an aviator would be like, and it was just awesome because you get there and all you're worried about is flying or things that are related to flying from the first second you step on to, like, the campus. So the first 3 weeks are all, like, ground school, and you go through all of these large, like, presentations where you learn about how the Marine Corps works together with all the different functions of aviation, all the 6 different functions of aviation. And then it starts off in there's a big general room where everybody gets together. You start out in this giant classroom, and it has There's about 400 students that are all there. And it's people from all the different airframes, all the different ground areas of aviation. And you're basically taking courses on how it all works together. And then it slowly gets necked down into, like, you go into an overall assault support community, which is the helicopters. And then, like, they break out into, like, the jet section and the ground support section and everything. And then you ultimately end up into a smaller subset. So it ultimately ends up with just a Cobra shop. And so for, like, a week and a half, you're taking nothing but, like, classes on how can you plan attacks, like what weapons do you have to do all these things, like ridiculous amounts of information, right?
And it's all, are you talking like all theory? Like this is the things you should be able to do, this is what we should be able to do, or is this is what we do? Like this is like theory or reality? It's a lot
of theory, but it's also like how can you apply it? Okay. But then you get to the general like application phase next, you know? And then so you go through and you'll do a couple planning exercises with like everybody. And then you go back into your
So hold on, real quick, before for those that don't know, you want to explain like who all's involved in WTI? Like this isn't just like, hey Cobra guys, come out, you're going to WTI. This is like Cobra guys, F-18 guys, Osprey guys.
Yeah, it's every platform that the Marine Corps has.
Plus the ground side.
Yeah.
So they have a battalion reinforced.
Right, so there is a battalion reinforced that supports the wing for the only time in the history of ever. So they'll come out and like support this exercise. But then you also have all of the different Marine Wing Support Squadron pieces, and then all of the different ground parts of the air arm of the Marine Corps. So you have like the guys that shoot the Stingers, you have the guys that run the radios, you have the guys that fix the aircraft, you have the guys that run FARPs, and when all of that stuff comes together. So,
and the good thing is like especially on the A side, like don't you even your maintainers and stuff, those are the best dudes. Not
necessarily.
Okay.
But, I mean, I would say the maintainers is.
What about the crew chiefs?
Crew chiefs for sure.
Yeah. I say because and that's what I guess that's kind of what I was alluding to. Maybe the maintainers are just support, kind of like the artillery battalion and the infantry battalion.
I think what you're getting at is if you're like a flying or functioning member in the exercise,
you've proven yourself to make it to that.
You are above and beyond like the average group.
Okay.
So like I went through, there were 3 crew chiefs that were from my squadron that went through with me, like. Just great guys, like good guns, but they could also like understand what was going on as something was happening too.
Do you remember what infantry battalion supported you and what RD battalion? What year was this? When did you go to WCI?
This was 2013 in April.
Okay.
So no, I can't remember. I mean, because those were the things that. Like, I mean, that was trivial information to me. Like, I didn't give a shit.
You were deep in the books, man. You were getting hazed by your
I was sleeping for like 4 hours a night. So
you get into WTI, you start doing, all the tactics, all the stuff that some of the stuff probably what you thought you knew really well, and then you got there and they beat you up and they're like, you don't know it, you piece of shit. Yeah. I assume that's what happened. How did you feel like the last 2 weeks? You're coming through the end of it and you're like, holy crap, like Jesus. Did you feel like more confident, or were you like?
I was like, honestly, the last 2 weeks were great. I was like, let's go. Like, I got this. Because I mean, I knew with my background there were a couple people who weren't too keen on me going.
Yeah.
So I knew that, and every touch point that I had with a MOTS instructor, who's MOTS is the one who runs WTI.
What's MOTS stand for?
Woof.
Isn't it? I'm not even going to try it. Whatever.
Yeah.
MOTS 1 is the one that they run WTI.
Yeah. Oh, that's going to piss me off.
Marine Air Warfare Training School? No. I'm just making
That's
shit
pretty
up.
good. Yeah.
We'll go with that. We'll go with that.
Yeah.
So anyway, you were at MOTS and...
But, so... Yeah, there were a lot of people who I don't want to say a lot. There were a couple people who weren't necessarily. It's not that they didn't want me to go, but they weren't too keen on me going.
Was it because they didn't think you were ready, or
it was personality conflicts? Okay. And
That's I feel like there's a lot of personality conflicts over in the Cobra side.
So, and I mean, some of them are warranted, but then there's other.
You're kind of an asshole.
There's other things, we could talk about those over a beer, but every touch point that I had with a MOTS instructor, I made sure that it was perfect.
Yeah.
Like every single thing that I did, I just made sure that it was perfect, So like on my your night systems instructor qualifications, I did do those out in 29 Palms for a ITX, and like they came out.
This is during WTI?
No, this was prior.
Oh, okay,
so we're talking prior interactions, but just made sure that everything that they had, like there was like little things. There's no spelling mistakes on like their packets that they get, like the presentations that they get are succinct and like. As
much as we hate on the little things, it is the little things that count to a point.
Yeah,
I say to a point.
And I mean, I'm not saying it was just me that was doing all this. Like as you're going through these qualifications to go there, you have like a team of people. Like I had one of my best friends. She was phenomenal. And I told her, I was like, I need this shit to like sparkle and be great. And she was like, you got it. And like, she would just literally like turn around and like crack the whip and like make everybody like make all this stuff perfect. Like I could go back to her and I'd be like, this is fucked up. I need you to change it. I'm sorry. I'll buy you a case of beer tomorrow. And she would just like take care of it. So, and it was good. But
I don't think anybody goes to WTI or finishes WTI thinking they did it on their own.
Oh no!
That's definitely a one. You have to be prepped to even go there. So like the build up, and I've like again, I've talked to guys, and it seems like in the ACE, the air combat element, you're just chasing quals all day, every day, and then when you get tapped to go to WTI, you become like the squadron dude, and it's like. Not only are you chasing quals, but you're chasing every qual, and you have to get them all because you have to meet these prereqs. So, do you think when you got to WTI and you met all these pilots and stuff like that, do you think your instructors were? How did you think about the instructor? Were you? Let me think of the wording. Were they where you thought they were? Were they where you thought they should be? Like, were they amazing pilots? Like, were they like, oh shit, these are people I'm looking up to. Like, I want to strive to be up to that next level. Or were you like, fuck this dude, man, they're just hazing the shit out of me. Real talk.
I would say when I went through, it was probably 75, like, respect, teach me everything, like, I know you're better than me. And then 25, like, I would get in there and guys would tell me shit, and I would be like, this is the stupidest fucking thing I've ever heard.
Okay.
Like, and not stupidest fucking thing I've ever heard, as in, like...
Were they telling you this out of their own, like, background, or were they telling you this because it was, like, a part of the syllabus that they had to teach?
It was a lot of it was whenever I thought it was like, why are you telling me this? It was always out of their own background. Like,
oh, okay.
Like, why are you telling me this?
Oh, so they tried to relate whatever the lesson was to like a real world event that they may have.
Right. For instance, some guy told me, he was like the moral of the story was don't shoot gun over top of a helicopter on the ground because you're going to drop brass in their rotors. And I was like, well, no shit. I was like, you learned that from day one. I was like, why are we discussing this as a debrief point at like a mission that we just went through that took like 5.5 hours where we went 340 miles. Like, why are we dealing with this now?
Yeah, that's the minutia that you can.
It was right.
You and your wingman can talk about.
Right, exactly. It's not the big, like the higher level stuff. It was like, and I understand there's a need for some things like that, but I mean, when that guy said that to me, I was like,
I mean. To be honest, that's not bad though. 25%. That's stuff that you think's maybe not as pertinent as it should be or could be. Yeah, that's not too bad. Yeah. So you finish WTI. You get through WTI, obviously. First off, what was the hardest thing you did in WTI? What was the hardest thing for you personally to overcome, or to? What was your thing?
I would say, well, personally, I got the Double Dragon there.
Ooh.
And I lost 15 pounds.
You got the Double Dragon at WTI?
Yeah, WTI.
Jesus.
I lost 15 pounds in about 48 hours.
For those that don't know, on ship, I never heard this term until I was on my first MU, the Marine Expeditionary Unit, for those that haven't listened to a previous podcast. That's when you do a deployment on ship. The Double Dragon normally occurs on ship at least once per deployment. I think I did one where we did 3 on one deployment. But that's where do you know what the actual disease is? There's some kind of
disease.
Yeah, there's some kind of it's what you always hear about when you hear the cruise ships. Like this cruise ship had 400 people with seasickness or whatever. That's Double Dragon. What that means is that you're
incapacitated.
You're incapacitated and you're blowing fluids out of a couple orifices. So we'll leave it at that. So you got Double Dragon at WTI, which has got to be horrible.
It was awful. I remember it was right before a flight brief. I walked up to the instructor and I was like, I'm fucked up. And he looks at me and he was like, and he was just like, get the fuck away from me. See you later.
Don't touch me, you infected one.
And then
you're like a zombie.
Went back and slept for like 36 hours and then get up and went and did it. But
dude, Double Dragon. That'll get you.
I would say the hardest thing, the ground school was pretty tough. But I would say there was one flight we had to do. That one that we were where I was talking about, where we had to fly. We were way out east of Gila Bend, and it was basically a simulated high threat strike mission where you're flying in at night, and you're basically at between 30 and 50 feet, and you're just like flying around. You're like, oh, cactus, and then you're like sitting there, and you're like, oh, didn't see that one. That was like 30 feet off the right side, and you're just sitting there. You're like, "Oh God!"
You're like playing the lottery out there.
Yeah, and I was flying with a Cobra pilot, just legend, Lieutenant Colonel, great dude. Who after WTI,
you want to throw his name out there?
No.
Okay.
After WTI, he moved out, and he was the Station XO at Pendleton, and I flew with him probably for like 50 more hours. He's just the man. But I was just flying with him. He's like, oh, that was close.
When you talking about flying low and high threat environments, are you looking at, when you say that, is that more like near peer kind of threat environments that you're talking about, like your Chinas and your Russias and I don't know if you say North Koreas, somebody with a legitimate air defense system.
Yeah, like you're flying against, I would say, an integrated air defense system similar to like an Iran is what we would do at WTI.
So based off of, we don't want to talk about anything that's classified, but based off of what you know from the classified side to what you did on what you actually did, do you think that your training was adequate?
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day,
I guess you never know until you're there.
Well, yeah, but I mean, at the end of the day, it's just, you've got to remember there is a dude on the other side who probably has not trained even close to as much as you have to kill him.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I know exactly what you're saying.
So it's like
the E3, equivalent on the Iran side, bro is probably not looking at the radar 100% of the time. He's probably not doing whatever he's supposed to be doing.
Probably worried about where his rippets are going to come from.
He's texting with whoever, he's sending.
And I mean, it's not to say that stuff's not scary. There's a lot of
and maintenance issues on their sides.
Right. Well, when you start looking at things like what they have in Syria now, which are like, I mean, those are legitimate helicopter killer weapons that they have.
Yeah.
And I mean, those things are a lot more scary than the stuff that I trained against in 2013. When that stuff popped up, when
I think
ISIS started going on, that's a lot different. But
I'm not gonna go into any details, but because I think a lot of it's still classified. But I know that the guys that were flying against ISIS were definitely up against a lot different air threats. They were some of them were dodging SAMs. You know, some of these dudes, and like I said, I'm not going to talk about what they did or what SAMs or whatever, because that's obviously classified, but there was definitely a higher air threat in an area like that because of the Iranian influence and, you know, stuff like that. But so anyway, so now you're done with WTI. How fucking good did that feel to just be done and get the patch?
It was awesome, man.
Were you like, thank God, Jesus, I'm alive. I made it through. Back to the squadron. How'd your life change back in the squadron?
So I remember I got back and our advance party had just gotten back, and I think we finished on a Thursday, I want to say, and I wanted to play the card to see like how long can I get away with not going to work.
It's typical Lance Corporal move.
Yeah, and
going to dental.
I want to say the answer to that was about 4 or 5 days, where I was just like going to play golf every day and everything. And then
they were like, "Bullshit, bro. We put a lot of money into you.
That's exactly my XO was like. We just spent $1 million on you. You better get your ass over here." And I was like, "Oh, all right. What's up, sir?" And he was like, "I'm going on leave.
You're it.
Figure this shit out." He's back from his FAC tour, and then we basically, me and one other guy had to put together like a plan to figure out, you know, how are we going to keep the guys current who just got back from Afghanistan, and then how
you went back to the same squadron, correct?
Yep, same squadron.
Where were they at on their deployment tempo?
They
had just gotten home.
They had just gotten home. Like advance party.
Oh, okay.
Was there.
So you got back. Advance party came back.
Yeah.
You were probably about to start receiving the boots.
Exactly. Like we actually, I think when I got back, there were actually two Huey boots that had already checked in the squadron when we were gone.
Okay.
And so I mean, it was just a matter of like, what are we going to do with all these people now? And then they were like, "Hey, you've got 6 whiskey helicopters, and then we're just going to start giving you Zulus. So figure out how you're going to keep everybody current with all their flight hours." And then just doing like back of the napkin math, you're like, it's impossible. You're like, we're not going to be able to do this.
It's just not going to happen.
Yeah, you just walk into the CO's office. You're like, "Sir, we need to shut the squadron down."
This is right before you got Zulus?
I think when I had gotten back from WTI, we may have had 2 of them, but I think we had gotten like the ones that didn't work. You know,
so for the guys that were whiskey pilots like yourself, if you, let's say, because you did a ground tour not too long after that, right? That's when you came to us. If you had stayed in the squadron, if you were like, "I'm a whiskey pilot, I'm at the squadron," what does the transition look like for a whiskey guy going to the Zulu? So, how much do you have to relearn? Is there a lot to relearn, or is it just a few things?
Well, transitioning to the Zulu it's a lot, and I mean, I can't speak from experience, but like you have to go back to the RAG, and you have to do like a limited syllabus there, and it depends how much you have to do, depends on what qualifications you had.
Okay.
So like me as a WTI, I had to do like exponentially less than a guy who's just a section lead. If
you had come back and they were like, "Hey, you're going to transition to the Zulu," how long does that take normally?
Probably like 6 months.
Well, that's not
until
too bad.
You're like fully qualled again. You
Okay.
know? But I mean, like I had like my buddy who we went through WTI with, they transitioned him to the Zulu 6 months before he went to WTI, and then so he went to WTI in the Zulu.
Oh.
Having only flown it for like 6 months.
Did he make it through WTI?
He did. And he did
nice.
great. But I mean, like, you get back and you're doing a maintenance flight on it, and he comes upstairs and he's like, I don't know how to do this, man. And he's like grabbing some kid that's like right out of the RAG that's like teaching him how to. So it's like,
because you don't learn the minutia in WTI at that
right,
point. You're looking at big picture stuff.
Yeah.
So you came back. How long were you back at the squadron before you got ground orders?
I think a year. So, yeah. Because I came back and basically what happened is we had a bunch of Zulu pilots that were getting fed into the squadron. And then we had a bunch of whiskey pilots that were coming back from Afghanistan. Some of those whiskey pilots were going to transition to the Zulu. Some of them were just going to like go away, either like out of the Marine Corps to other ground jobs, whatever, but they still had time to fly, right?
Yeah.
So at this time, the Zulu production stopped for whatever reason, and we stopped getting them. And then so they were like, so there were 2 other squadrons that were Zulu squadrons on the Camp Pendleton line, and then it was us and another squadron flying the Whiskey. That other squadron went to Okinawa, and then so we were left with all of these flight hours we needed to fly because the Zulus couldn't do them.
Okay.
Right? So we picked up all these flight hours and all of their like ammo.
Nice.
And so we were just basically think of it as going to like the range. Remember the one range that you ran where you were like, everybody get online. We are going to shoot from now until sundown. And we're like, Staff Sergeant, it's 5:30. They're like, I don't care. We're shooting it all.
I had 20,000 rounds. It was a good time.
That was what we did for about 3 months. Because we just had to, because the way that it works is like, if you don't use it, you lose it.
Yeah.
And then the next year you don't get it. So like we were doing that just for the mag. So like we were just shooting, and I mean it was fun.
How many Hellfires did you get for that? Mostly rockets and guns, obviously.
It was rockets and guns, and it was mostly gunned.
Yeah.
So yeah.
When you get the rockets, do you in training? How often do you get HE or like your flechette, or do you guys ever carry WP? I don't think I ever had a.
So
I don't think I ever had a Cobra that carried WP for me.
I mean, they used to do it. I'm not sure how it still works, but like everybody got to shoot one flechette before you went to Afghanistan, just so you could see
just so you see
what the pattern looks like on the ground.
The beaten zone.
Yeah. We used to carry WP if we were doing FAC A.
Yeah. That's who I normally worked with that had them 5-inch WP from A10s out in Gila Bend.
We would carry 2.75. Yeah. And like, I mean, that's an ideal load. Like we would get, it's probably something trivial like 10 rockets per squadron per year, which is like nothing.
Really?
You know, probably something like that.
That was all you got?
I mean, something similar along those
lines. I know you're like ballparking it.
But yeah, I would say most of the stuff that we got was either inert or HE, and it was dependent.
I mean, inert's not too bad.
Yeah.
You know, because you're getting you see the effect. Like just an inert round hitting the dirt. It's not that much bigger than an HE round hitting it,
right?
Effect wise, but I could see like flechette. Like I feel like you would need to see the beaten zone. And I feel like I read a book, and I don't remember the name of the book. It was about the first Cobra guys in Vietnam. They were just receiving these weapons, and flechette had just come out. And one of the guys was like, these flechette rockets fucking suck. Like, they don't hit anything.
Yeah.
And then I guess he shot it at a target that was on water and realized, like, he saw the impact. Yeah, the beaten. He could actually see the beaten zone. Right. And he's like, okay, never mind. Like, these are actually pretty good.
80 by 80 or, what was it, 75, 125, and 200 by 35? Depending on which one it was.
Yeah, it just depends on your angle.
These are just these numbers that I used to have to remember.
Yeah. And if you didn't, goddamn you. Yeah. So now you're a WTI, or you came back from WTI, you're training all your dudes, and they're like, hey man, time for you to do B-billet, or how does that go? I don't know.
Yeah, so I mean, once you crest that realm into WTI, there's a lot of things where, you know, they invest this money in you and you're expected to
feedback into the
to
community.
like do something, which I 100% get. So like
Definitely.
there's a lot of jobs that like may not be like off limits to you, but like I am not going to go as a WTI and be a flight school instructor. That's just not going to happen. You know, like they try and push you to these jobs that are doing things that require that education you got. So things like the weapons evaluation stuff up in China Lake, which I think has moved to Yuma in the past couple years. The more advanced FAC tours like an ANGLICO, RA, or MARSOC, or, you know, like there's a couple other no-name things that you can do as like a FAC with those things where, you know, you go out and you're like the fires SME for like the Marine Corps with all that shit, because you know all that stuff. Yeah. Because like as a WTI, which one thing we didn't hit on was the FAC A piece, which like you have to know not only your aircraft but everything else.
Really?
So when somebody checks on, you're not expected to be able like.
So you're not required to be a FAC A to go to WTI?
You are.
Oh, okay.
That's what I'm saying. So like you're required to know
Oh, I
that.
thought you said you did have to be. Okay,
Yeah.
my bad.
So like it's one of those things that it's always a Marine who is in the fire shop doing like that kind of role because of that. So
Okay.
yeah.
And then, so at what point did you end up? Did you know you were coming up for orders, and did you get to like?
Yes.
Did you get a choice?
So yeah, the way that it worked for us in the squadron is our XO was like, "What do you want to do? I'll talk to the monitor." And then I basically told him I wanted a FAC tour. Because of the way that I graduated WTI, I missed the application window to apply for a MARSOC tour because it was like right before WTI ended. And I didn't have the WTI application or WTI qualification to apply for that. So it was like...
Was that a requirement or a prerequisite?
I mean, it's not...
It's not a prerequisite, but it's like a...
It's not, but it is.
Nod in the wing kind of thing.
So it's a good old boys club to do that, which it should be.
I would say, I was going to say, it definitely should be,
Yeah.
because that's how you get the best dudes.
Yeah.
And it should be the best dudes.
Yeah, for sure. So I missed that, and then I thought about doing the HMX thing, which is flying the president, but then I was like, no.
What would you do? What would you do as a Cobra pilot doing that?
You would do the transportation flying.
Oh, really?
So yeah, I had a couple good friends that did that.
Really?
Yeah, as
you'd
Cobra
go
pilots.
from being a shooter to be a bus driver.
Exactly, and that was what I couldn't swallow. I couldn't swallow it,
even if it is for the president.
Yeah,
you know.
So I was just like, that doesn't sound like it. And then I was like, I called some random dude at First Anglico who like I didn't even know, and I was like, "Do you like it?" And he was like, "Yeah, it's fucking sick." And it was like, "All right, cool.
I'll do that.
Let's go to First Anglico." And then I told my XO that, and then we actually get a meeting with our monitor as captains. And so I sat down with him, and he's like, "What do you want to do?" And I was like, "I want a combat deployable FAC tour." And he was like, "Done."
Nice.
And I was like, "I don't want to go to a line battalion." And I was like, "I'll take literally any other deployable, like combat deployable FAC tour." He's like,
saying no line to battalion is saying Anglico.
Yeah.
I mean, that's basically what you're
the,
saying.
The only thing that I was thinking was like, I do not want to go do the planning process with grunts at 29 Palms.
Yeah. And to be like a company JTAC.
Yeah. The day after I graduated TACP school, I get sent to 29 Palms to do the planning process with grunts. And I was just like, I remember I looked at your old CO or from your SALT.
Oh, the team leader?
Yeah.
Captain Watt?
Yeah, I looked at him and I was like, how did I end up here? I was like, this is the one place I didn't want to be. So
that's funny. I don't remember him going to 29 Palms. No, whatever. But so you got to Anglico then. So now you're like, okay, I'm going to do a FAC tour. Were you like, fuck, I'm about to go meet up with a bunch of ground guides? For those that don't know, like the air side and the ground side is two completely different worlds. So like him coming from the air side to the ground side, just like me, if I was to go do something from the ground side to the air side, I'd be like, okay, I have no idea what I'm getting myself into. I don't know the background. I don't know the minutia of this unit, whatever. So he's coming from a Cobra background to the ground side, and he's expected to come from being able to fly and shoot and stuff like that to being on the ground and conducting like the aircraft, like telling them where to fly, telling them where to shoot and stuff like that. Not only that, First Anglico has a reputation as being a great ground combat element. You know, JTACs are great. Joint Fires Observers are great. Like, everyone's great. I showed up at First Anglico as a JTAC who had just come out of a deployment to Sengen. Like, oh shit, I better know what I'm doing because these guys are the pros. Like, you look at it from the outside in, like, these guys are the pros. So, coming there has a little bit of its own, like, okay, what am I getting myself into? So, I can see, like, if you're coming from, especially outside of the community as a skid guy, coming into it, there's got to be like where you're like, okay, am I ready for this? Like, what am I about to get myself into? Because you're coming from a community where you're two captains in a Cobra, you know, maybe a major, whatever, flying around, you do your thing, you come back to a ground combat element where as a captain, you're either in charge of the entire team or you're in charge of a portion of the team, and you're responsible for directing the fires onto the target. So what was the transition like from being an air guy, to a ground guy?
Yeah, so I came into ANGLICO, and I was just... This is one of the things that I carried on, or have carried on now through, the past 4 or 5 years as I moved to the civilian world. But I just went in there completely humbled and just tried to remember that I was the person that was invading their space. And then if I walked in there and tried to tell everybody how to do their job, that it was just not going to go well for me. So that was how I walked in there, and I think that worked out pretty well.
What was your mindset going to ANGLICO? Did you feel like you were over-prepared, under-prepared, or just let's see what happens?
I felt like I was 130% prepared.
Yeah?
I mean, I don't know. And that's probably a very arrogant thing to say.
The way you felt and the way you were the same? Or...
Well, I mean, when you're talking about let's break that down a little bit. So you're talking about technical and tactical knowledge, right? I thought with my tactical knowledge, I would go in there and just blow everybody's doors off, which, I mean, I kind of did. But the other stuff, I had a couple of teams before at the Gunfighters, being in charge of maintenance and stuff like that. But I had never actually been in charge of, and even in ANGLICO, you're dealing with maybe a PFC, not 70 PFCs, you know. But I wasn't.
Yeah, it's
ready.
not a typical unit for the. Yeah. So I don't think I talked about it in the last podcast, because the one, and forgive me if I'm wrong, because I recorded half these on the road for my cross country road trip. But the last one should have been, I think my buddy was with. He got out and he went to 3rd ANGLICO as a reservist. So that's a little different. But ANGLICO is a small unit. Their whole mission is to direct air fire, naval gunfire. It's Air Naval Gunfire Liaison Company is the name. And it's all about combined arms. So call in airstrikes, call in naval gunfire, call in mortars, call in artillery, all at the same time, and just fuck everybody up. So you come into a unit like that, and you obviously know the air side. Our biggest issues, I think, we had with guys coming in, FACs coming in, were not sometimes the shooter platforms, but mostly your C-130 guys, your 53 guys, stuff like that. And it's not their fault. It's just they've 0861s that become JTACs or forward observers that become JTACs are the guys that they're on the ground doing targeting. So they understand that side, and then they just have to learn the JTAC side. Cobra pilots coming in understand the attack side, and they hear the entire 9 line from their side. So they understand that side. Your C-130 guy, your 53 guy, they don't hear either one of those sides. They're not part of target location. They're not part of target prosecution. So it's kind of all new for them. So it's not a surprise that they struggle the most coming into a unit like ANGLICO or even 10th Marines, 11th Marines, whatever, as a FAC, and having some issues. So you got to ANGLICO. Were you immediately designated as a team lead, or when you showed up? So I had just come home from a deployment. I had just recently, within a few months, become a JTAC evaluator. So you showed up. You were one of the new guys, and I
actually remember the first day that I met you in Big Earl's office.
Go on
with Walker.
Okay.
Neither of you had rank on, and you were just standing there talking shit. And you were about to go to the field, and I was like, "Who the fuck is this guy?"
Oh, really?
And then
I don't remember.
And then you just got up and left, and I was like, "Hey, what's up, sir? I'm Archer." And then we sat down and started talking, and then you left and went to the 07s, I think. And then after that conversation, I basically left and went to TACP school, and I didn't see you again for 6 weeks, and I was like, "This guy's kind of a dick." But
well, then you came back, and I got to do your qualifications as a JTAC.
Yeah.
I wasn't such a dick. I was all right, I feel like. At this time, so what At that time, I was the SALT chief or supporting arms liaison team chief for Team Delta.
Yeah.
And that means I was the senior enlisted guy on my team of 17 guys. That means you have two firepower control
the training
teams.
Officer.
I did training for the brigade, honestly.
Yeah.
Because we had, at one point, they made me the brigade chief at the same time I was the SALT chief, too. So
we don't need to get into that. That's all that's going to do is just raise my blood pressure when we start
Possibly.
That, so.
But I was the brigade chief for a little bit. I was the SALT chief for, a deployment plus some. So, anyway, I became a JTAC evaluator right before you got there. A few months before you got there, I got my certification, which I was like, sick, I'm a JTAC evaluator. And then I realized
this is going to be so awesome.
It comes with like many tens of hours of paperwork. Yeah. So when all these boots showed up, such as Archer, I had to take them to the field and do all their controls and stuff like that, do their JTAC training, and then evaluate them and be like, all right, this guy's not going to kill somebody that he's not supposed to. And he's good to go. He can control on his own. And not everybody gets that. Not everybody gets that nod and that tip of the hat or that, stamp in the book that says you're good to go. So I never, honestly, like I was saying, I didn't have too many problems with the shooter platform guys. Every once in a while, there'd be something that you had to clean up. But overall, they get it because they were on the other side of the radio the entire time. You were on the other side of the radio, so the 9-line, the 12-step process,
yeah.
Like you knew
it's a perspective at that point. Yeah.
Now you got to learn the target location portion of it from the ground. Here's your laser ranger finder, or what I'm saying. Your laser rangefinder, your binos, your map and compass. So getting to ANGLICO, you're a WTI, and you're in the mix on the ground now. You're not in the comfort of a helicopter that has AC or whatever. I don't know how you guys lived up there, but
yeah.
How was it strapping on the radio and walking around on the ground and doing that? What'd you think?
It was crazy. It's funny that you say strapping on, but like, because I was to the point where we used to say like you strap on the aircraft, like I would get on and I would like go do this. I'd be like, let's go, and so going out to ANGLICO, my former OPSO at the squadron, he was a FAC in Ramadi in 2006. So like I sat down with him like multiple times. I was like, is this the right thing for me? Like, do I want to do this? And he was like, just go in there, and he's like, be humble and smart. And I was like, perfect. So just going in there and like knowing that all of the things better than everybody in the room, but not being a dick was like super hard, because there are a lot of people that
it's just like any community.
Yeah. So like
there's good guys, there's shitty guys,
right. And it's a difference in personality. So there are a lot of people that were in my squadron that if you brought my name up, would be like, that guy's a dickhead. And I'd be like, well, yeah, but I had to be a dickhead because we had a limited amount of time for this transaction. Like, I needed this to happen in 15 seconds, and you were either going to give me what I needed or not, and I needed to move on to the next thing because I had an hour before I had to go do a 14-hour flight. Yeah. So I had to, like, kind of remove that and figure out how things worked on the ground side, which I found out was way slower. And like just kind of trying to slow that whole expectation chain down of like, okay, maybe you don't need to jump down this guy's throat because this thing is fucked up today. It might be better tomorrow, So
I would say that air guys, especially shooter guys, are way more efficient with a lot of stuff. I'll just say a lot of stuff in general. Like, a lot of stuff, you guys are more efficient. And I think that comes from the fact that you live in a job where you fuck up, especially as a helo guy, there's no ejection seat, Yeah. If you fuck up, you're going into the ground. You can't just jump out. There's blades there to chop you up if you did that. So I think that's part of it. And I don't know. I do say, I will 100% say, I think the air side is more decisive on stuff, because it's like, look, this is it. Like, we got to make a call. Let's do it. This is it. And the ground side, sometimes, I mean, I think ANGLICO, though, as a unit overall, you didn't have too much exposure to a battalion, but I think ANGLICO is way above, your normal battalion JTACs, just because of the fact that they get way more training opportunities.
Right.
There's way more training things that are introduced to them that, we send guys to JTM, which is the Joint Tactical Medicine. You're talking about 15 or 17 guys going out and getting 20,000 rounds to shoot in a week, along with like not tier 1, but top grade, like medical training. At the same time. Which your battalion guys don't get that. So,
well, I think we're talking about two different things, because I think you're talking about the tactical level, and then I'm getting lost in like the staff.
Oh, you're talking about staff planning
level.
Oh, you're definitely way better at staff planning.
Yeah, but I mean, like,
that's that nerd shit.
Yeah, right.
We're trying to kill people, bro.
We did give the disclaimer that I'm the first officer on this podcast.
You are the first officer on the podcast. You staff officer.
No, but I would largely agree with that. Like, the guys that I met in ANGLICO and the guys that I led in ANGLICO and was allowed to like develop, in comparison to the guys that I led in the battalion and developed in the battalion when we were on the MEU, the dudes at ANGLICO picked it up better, and it was a better culture for them to learn, whereas the battalion, they were more worried about like, oh god, I gotta get my IPs off my top and all this shit. Like, and ANGLICO made it a little bit better for them to be like, I need to be better at my job.
We were definitely more focused on your skills in combat. Like your combat, like, hey man, you're coming at me as a radio operator. Honestly, I could give a fuck if your cover is starched. But if you can't shoot me an HF fucking, line over to that direction to this net, like, get out of here. Like, I don't, you're garbage to me. Like, well, so we definitely hold a higher standard for our actual MOS skills, and a lower standard, I think, which a lot of your small units like that come to with your, like, I don't know what you want to call them, but your, like, hands in pockets, haircuts, fucking, like, oh no, you didn't wear chucks today. Shit. That's because we're going to the field, just like yesterday.
Right. And that was one of the, like, because you left me and you went to the MEU. And then we were reunited.
I wanted to. I loved the
MEU. I tried to bring you back as my chief, and then they were like, absolutely no way are you guys going to be allowed to work in a direct relationship. But, I mean, like, I fought that at every single, because, like, when I showed up there, I kept hearing all this, like, oh, well, it's all hiking boots and frog gear. And I was like, well, yeah, are we going to go out and get some? Or, like, why does that matter? And then, so, like, I had to start implementing, like, we are going to be Marines again. As much as, like, I hated that as a pilot, and I was like,
do you think there was an issue? Do you think it was too cowboy?
I don't. I think that the head shed.
Yeah.
And, like, I think that they thought, for whatever reason, it was too cowboy.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, I was like, let's go do it. I was like, I don't understand. Like, if we're doing our job, why does anybody give a shit?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, like, that was the biggest thing. It was like, we just went out and achieved 120% of our training goals here. I was like, why is somebody coming up to me and being like,
where's his boot
like,
blouses
like
at?
What is this? Like, why do you have frog gear on? And I was like, why are you across the street? Like, that was always my question. Like, why are you in my shit?
Yeah.
Like, if I wanted your help, I mean, I would have asked for it. It's nice that if you would have came over here and, like, asked me about it, that would have been nice. But they never went to me. So that was why I always had a big problem.
When you got there, the time you got there, we were at a point where we were kind of like, we didn't really go to headquarters for much. Like, the teams all had their dudes that could schedule ranges.
No,
we had our own ASP dudes.
And like, I carried that on, as you know.
Yeah, but I know 100% what you're saying. And it became like, why are we asking you? Like, we know we can do this. Yeah. Like, here's the range reg said we can do it. We have the ammo to do it. We have this to do it. We have this to do it. Like, why are you questioning it? And I understand that 100%. Because I don't know. I think any small team, any small unit like that goes through the same shit where you're like, I'm just trying to do my fucking job, and goddamn headquarters is asking about my haircut.
I looked at it as a business, right? I looked at it as I was like, how are you going to provide value for me? And a perfect example of this is, it was like, how are you going to provide value for me? Like, I can do this on my own, so I'm going to give you a chance to do it for me. There
was a lot of missed chances there from the headquarters.
I needed ammunition the day after Thanksgiving, and I was like, I know that there is a way to do this because I have talked to somebody, and I was like, if this doesn't show up here on Sunday, we're done. I was like, we're done. What happens? It doesn't show up. I call him and be like, oh, hey, what's going on with this? We're like, oh, well, we're on 96, and I was like, that's not good enough. All right, we're done. I was like, that's not good enough. I was like, my guys drove out here yesterday. I was like, we missed our entire holiday, and you fucked our range. Like, and that's where it began with me. Just like, it was like, I don't need your help. And then they were like, no, you need our help. And I was like,
Well, yeah, I think a lot of times headquarters thought like, fuck, they're doing it on their own. We have to inject ourselves because if not, what are we here for? I will tell you one thing. I will say that ANGLICO opened my eyes as an NCO, and as a staff NCO at that point, because I got promoted to staff sergeant about 8 months, I think, before I went to ANGLICO. I will say it opened my eyes to the actual training opportunities that you have, because as a sergeant at 10th Marines, which is where I was at, I was like, oh, we can schedule a range to do this. And in reality, I didn't think about, like, let me hit up the battalion, battalion whatever, the dude with the
S3.
the ammo tab. Yeah. Like, hey, how much ammo do we have? Like, how much am I authorized for this year? Can we shoot this range? Why not? Why can't we shoot this range? Like, right. I didn't realize, because I was always the guy on the receiving end, like, hey, get in the truck, go to the range, get out of the range, get out of the truck, you're at the range. And at that point, now I'm a staff sergeant and I'm at ANGLICO, and they're like, hey, man, what do you want to do?
Yeah.
Oh, you want to go HERS? You want to go do fast
rope? That was
what
you want to go do this?
My
chief for the first time and the end of my time there, you guys were great at doing that shit. Just being like, we're just going to go do this and figure it out. With like, especially with the shooting ranges, like taking all those.
And that honestly, that was all because of Captain Watt.
Yeah.
Because I didn't realize like the things I could do. He made me get a whatever the count is. I don't remember what it's called now. To reserve ranges RIFMIS.
Yeah.
The RIFMIS account. But I remember getting a RIFMIS account, and I'm like, wait, we can just go on here and like just reserve stuff. Like we can just do this, and it was like, oh fuck! I thought all this had to be like all this other stuff had to be done.
Yeah.
Which in some places it does have to be done, but in places like ANGLICO, like you just reserve it, say I need this much ammo, then you go to the training meeting and go, this is what's happening, and tell them.
And then you go to somebody like me and be like, hey, we need some air for this, and be like, all right, I'll call my friends.
Dude, that was the other great thing about ANGLICO was the amount of pilots, the amount of FACs that were there that could reach back and be like, hey, what do you guys need for this month?
Yeah.
Oh, hey, you guys need some nighttime fucking whatever casts? I was talking to a guy on my Instagram page the other day, and I was telling him, I'm like, the best range I ever went to was San Clemente Island. Like, I think that is 100% my favorite range in the Marine Corps. Even better if I'm staying on main side at the hotel, and I can go to the Salty Crab after control and cast.
Yeah.
But, I'll sleep on the OP if I have to, but there's nothing like waking up on the OP on San Clemente Island, seeing the sunrise out there, and then control and cast all day. Like, that's just you can't ask for a better spot than that.
I remember I controlled cast out there one day because it got socked in, and the Hueys that were supposed to bring all of our guys off of the ship, I was out there with our old Navy boy from the brigade team.
Okay.
And we were out there, and all I had with me was a Mickey Mouse sweatshirt with the ears on the hood. And I'm standing there with a Prick 152 and just ripping bombs off these F-18s. And he's just sitting there, and he was like, this is unbelievable.
I cannot believe this is happening. Oh, man.
Yeah.
So you were at ANGLICO for, 2 years? Did you do a full 2 years?
I was there for 2.5, yeah.
After you left Anglico, did you got out after that, and then you went to the reserve side, or?
Yeah. So you want to talk about the MEU, or?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, the MEU.
Yeah.
So we were at Anglico together. So people know. Archer came to Anglico. He got spun up. He was his team lead. I was a team lead at Delta, and then at some point they came down and were like, "Hey, we have a hot fill. We need a staff sergeant to go to the MEU, which is go be the fires chief on ship, meaning nothing on my deployment at least." I was super butthurt about it. It is what it is. And then, you guys got attached to the MEU that I got sent to as the fires chief. It was, again, I had just come back from a deployment a few months beforehand, so I was the only staff sergeant that could fill that job because I had either was not tasked for a deployment coming up, or I had not just come off a deployment. I was about 8 months off of my deployment, so they sent me to the MEU to be the fires chief.
He had done his job so well that they knew that he wanted to get out of the Marine Corps, so they gave him this job.
And honestly, I literally told them, I was like, if you send me here, I'm getting out of the Marine Corps, and they sent me there. So it is what it is.
Yeah.
I will say they sent me there, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to make the best of this situation. I will go and see if I can go to WTI as a JTAC, because that is like the pinnacle of the JTAC community. Yeah. And if I was a WTI, I could stay a JTAC until I got out.
Let's keep it anonymous when you tell the story about this.
Yeah, I'll keep it anonymous, obviously. So I get to the MEU, and I'm like, hey, I want to go to... I'm like, hey, do you guys have a seat for WTI? And the air officer there is like...
I had turned it down because I was in the middle of a giant workup with my team, and I didn't want to leave all my guys.
Normally when the MEU and Anglico... When Anglico attaches to the MEU, or when the MEU is doing their workup for the deployment, they have a seat for WTI. A lot of the times that goes to the Anglico unit because they have the most experienced guys. He had just done WTI. He didn't want to go, so he was passing it off. I got orders to the MEU, and I was like, dude, I don't want to do this, or I don't want to go to the MEU, but if I am, at least maybe I'll go to WTI. Get to the MEU, talk to the air officer. I'm like, hey, man, I want to go to WTI. That's my next step as a JTAC, blah, 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 blah. End up, he told me, like, hey, that's an officer's course. It's not for you. And I'm like, that's fucked up. It's not an officer's course. It's enlisted too. I was super pissed about that. And honestly, that was the point. When he told me it's an officer's course, when I'm going to send you. And then the seat went unfilled. Like, no one even went. The MEU didn't even send anybody. So, and it's not like I was busy doing shit. I was doing nothing. So they did not send me. Then they didn't send anybody. That's when I was like, fuck this, I'm getting out of the Marine Corps. Alright, so I was super butthurt at this point, because I was like, this is a school, this is a coveted school for guys that haven't gone to it. The guys that have gone to it are like, dude, what are you doing to yourself? Why do you want to put yourself through that?
Horrible. It was so bad.
Yeah. But that was what I wanted to do. Didn't get to do it. It is what it is. So, anyway, I'm at the MEU now as the fires chief. Archer gets attached. His team gets attached to the MEU. We're with the 11th MEU. We push out in 2016, right? End of
September.
September, October, yeah, 2016. And we were on the same ship together, LHD-8, Macon Island, making babies.
Ugh.
You should have been down to the troop berthing.
Yeah.
No, it was garbage for me, but you guys had a good time.
Yeah, I didn't even leave with the ship.
Well, you got to go to Djibouti.
No,
and Malaysia.
Do you remember
I remember you and I in Djibouti, and you're like, hey, we got all this stuff happening tomorrow. There's all this air coming in, blah, 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 blah. And then like an hour later, somebody showing up, they're like, hey, we need you to go back to the ship.
Yeah.
And you got sent back to the ship, and I got stuck with, quotation marks. I had a good time. I had 6 sections or 5 sections of aircraft with I was the only JTAC.
I do remember that. I remember I was like, Jerry, we gotta go back to the ship. And he was like,
you have to go back to the ship?
He was like, are you sure that we need to go back to the ship? And I was like, well, to be honest with you, I don't know how to drive a stick, so I'm gonna need you to drive this vehicle back. And it was like, all right. And then we got in the car, and anybody who's ever driven on a highway in Djibouti, I was like, I'm gonna need you to pretend like
You're just flashing headlights and honking your horn.
I was like, I'm gonna need you to pretend like we're in a backcountry road because I knew what was happening, and I was like, I do not want to get involved with this. I just want to stay here. I was like, I'm gonna need you to drive slow, and so we just kept it slow, and we got there. And as soon as we pulled up, I was like, oh no, the Ospreys are gone. Weird. Can we set up the radio and call them? It's like, yeah, we just missed the Ospreys, and then we get stuck there for
oh no,
we were there for 16 days.
Djibouti's an interesting area because did you ever see you? I mean, obviously you saw the UN refugee camp right outside of the base.
Yeah,
that was huge. I mean,
it's crazy. The UN refugee camp and the Chinese companies building the water lines.
Yeah,
amazing area.
Yeah, Djibouti is a weird place. Yeah. I had a buddy. I won't name his name. He was at Djibouti during that same time frame, and I don't know what kind of special liberties he had or whatever he had with his unit, but he could drive a vehicle by himself off base, and he would go out in town in Djibouti and buy bottles of alcohol and come back on base and drink it. But he was like going to local shops, and I'm like, no way. No fucking way are you doing that. And I'm like, there's no way nobody knows you're doing that.
Well, apparently there was a big suicide bombing there in like, I want to say like 2006.
Really?
But the Muse used to pull in there and like port there. And like everybody would like, you weren't allowed to spend the night, but you were allowed to like go out and party and everything. So, because
I don't know what the party is like.
The XO of our BLT told me, he was like, it was actually like kind of cool because it's a French colony. He was like, you go downtown, and he was like, they knew you were coming. He was like, it was a pretty good area. And I was like, I just saw a dude take a shit in the middle of the sidewalk. I was like, I don't want to go anywhere near here. He was like, it was not like that, 14 years ago. You would
still see like European tourists out there, especially out by Arta Beach where that French base was.
Yeah.
Because you could swim with the whale sharks or whatever the hell they were called.
Yeah. Just another thing I don't want to do.
Huh. You wouldn't do that?
No.
I would do it. I don't know. They're not, they're not predators.
Send you back to Djibouti then.
Yeah, whatever. I'll go back to Djibouti. So, how'd you like your deployment? How was your ground side deployment compared? I mean, obviously it wasn't as combat, it was way more laid back. It was a different environment.
Yeah, I mean, it was different because there were like the two sides of my deployment. There was like the team lead aspect and like getting people ready and like, let's go deploy and like, we need to go do our job. And then there was like the staff officer portion of it. And like the staff officer portion going to Malaysia, like, are you fucking kidding me? That was an unbelievably good deal.
Yeah.
Like, the only way that it was negative for me was when they cut you out of my like party.
Well,
because I was sitting there, I was like, who am I gonna go party with in KL? Because we took you out for the first portion of it.
Yeah,
because they were like,
when we got hung up in Hong Kong. We spent a night in Hong Kong together.
Because they told me they were like, everybody needs to travel in pairs, and I was like, well, everybody's leaving me in Hong Kong, so I was like, I need to bring Kramer with
me. Kramer was the guy.
And then so we brought him out there. He had some things going on, whatever, and we just fucking rocked with it, and it was awesome.
Hong Kong was great.
Yeah, took those that 36-hour. San Diego to Dallas, Dallas to Hong Kong to KL, KL to Tawau. Yeah, that was a good one. Man.
So, for those that have never done an international flight, we got drunk on the flight out there, fell asleep, woke up, we were hungover, let that die off a little bit, and then got drunk again.
And still got cooked in Hong Kong.
I'm pretty sure I watched 3 movies on that plane and had time to sleep. And then we found out our flight to Malaysia. Was it flight to Malaysia was delayed or something?
Yeah.
Or is it on the way back? I can't remember if it's on the way there or on the way back.
When we get stuck in Hong Kong, which was just, I mean, that's just the worst possible.
Remember when we flew into Malaysia and that pilot felt like he basically crashed into the fucking flight line?
And all the masks came down?
Yeah. Bro, we hit the ground and I was just like, what the hell was that? People started clapping.
Yeah. I was sitting there as a pilot, and our soft liaison turns around. He goes, "Is this normal?" And I was like, "I don't know. I fly helicopters, man."
I cannot. And this is a commercial airliner. This is like a 747 or something. I cannot imagine landing any harder and surviving that flight. Like, that dude, and then he came on, he's like, Matt, like, boom! Welcome to Malaysia. Blah, 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 blah. Like, nothing happened. Like, hey, sorry about that hard impact that we just experienced. Like, yeah. Good times, man. So, anyway, we did the deployment. We did Malaysia. We did an exercise out in Malaysia. We worked together in Djibouti. We did some controls out there. You guys obviously got off more than I did because I was nerd command element guy. And then we get back from that, and that's when you decided to get out, or?
Yeah, no, I mean, I there was one op that we were supporting on the Mew, which you were involved in, that I was like, that's it for me.
Like real world or exercise?
Yeah, real world.
Okay.
So, and I think you know what I'm talking about. There's a couple leadership decisions that were made, and I was like, I am not okay with this anymore. I was like, because I can see that people are either A, taking in everything and choosing to make the wrong decision, or B, clueless. And I was like, either way, I want nothing to do with this. I'm out of here. And then I actually dropped my resignation 2 days after. So,
such is life, man.
Yeah. So, and then they asked me, like, when do you want to get out? And I was like, as soon as fucking possible.
Yeah, what's
the
earliest date available?
I was like, will you let me out tomorrow? And
you're like, wait, can I fly out from Guam or?
And then I called my monitor, and he was like, well, can you get out before the fiscal year? And I was like, I don't fucking care. And then I don't know. We can talk about the transition, but that was a.
Did you? So when you decided, to get out. Obviously, you didn't. You were. It was kind of on the fly.
It'd been stewing.
It'd been stewing, but had you made any real plans? So, and what I'm leading to is, what would you tell somebody that's getting ready to transition out? What should they look into? So, as a background, real quick, Archer got out, rolled into a job in corporate America, and I'll let him get into it if he wants to.
Yeah.
He rolled into a job in corporate America, big time corporate America, doing his thing, and did that. Did you plan for that, or was that a luck because you knew someone, happenstance, and what advice would you give somebody getting out?
So I kind of knew that I wanted to get out in 2015-ish when my contract would have expired had I not taken the ANGLICO thing. And I had my two roommates both chose to get their MBAs. And I was on the fence about taking all the tests to actually all the tests, the GMAT to go get my MBA as well. And I decided not to because the ANGLICO opportunity popped up. So,
go ahead.
All right, so I ended up going to ANGLICO, and I was like, what is my exit strategy going to be?
Yeah, okay.
When I leave ANGLICO, because I chose to go to this new job, which is great, and it gives me all of these soft skills of like leadership. I've now been able to develop which I did at the squadron, but now I've developed training plans where I have a hard beginning and a hard end, and I have an outcome. And did anything happen good? Be like, yes, we deployed this team to Syria and they were successful. We deployed this team to X country and they were successful. Everything's good. And so I thought that when I get out of the Marine Corps, everybody was just going to be like, hey, this dude's the shit. He knows what's going on.
He's legit, man.
Like, hey, did you hear he's a WTI? And I was like, man, this is going to be so awesome. And then all of a sudden, crickets. And then I'm like, oh shit, what am I going to do? So I started networking with a bunch of guys that were former skid pilots that I knew, and they set me up with what I thought was going to be a great job, and it turned out to be an offer that just never materialized. And then I ended up going through that cycle twice. So I ended up getting an offer and nothing happened. And then I ended up going through a giant interview process with Apple and with two other companies, and didn't get an offer from them, which was right before Christmas. And at this point, I had moved out of my house in Oceanside, and No, we're not talking like I'm like broken poor by any means. This was a choice.
But you got to pull a trigger on like a decision, yeah.
And so like this was a choice on my part because I was like, one of these 3 jobs is going to happen in December. I was like, we're moving out of this house because...
And you're married at this point.
Right, I'm married. And I was like, because this has to happen because of the way that the veteran moving, like how they move you stuff has to happen. So we moved out and decided to move in with my in-laws because I thought it was going to be like a 2-week thing. I got denied from all those jobs, and I was like, well, this is pretty dope.
So anyway, I'm staying in my
basement. I'm living in a van down by the river, and I'm sitting there, and I was like, this is horse shit. And I was like, how am I going to figure this out? And so I was just like, fuck it, I'm going skiing. And went out, bought a ticket to Salt Lake City.
You and Tim did, right? You and Tim went out for a couple weeks?
That was prior to all this stuff.
Okay.
We went on this giant trip. But yeah, there was a lot of stuff that happened in between there. I went to Vietnam and Cambodia, and it was awesome. So
as a civilian.
Yeah, as a civilian. So like now we're on the downward curve of this, coming through the new year. And I was like, I'm going to Utah. I was like, that's
fucking Utah, man. Utah's amazing.
I was like, I didn't find snow with Tim, so I was like, I'm going to Alta. I went up there and I had one day, and it was like, all right. And I'm sitting there, and I was like, I was by myself, and I'm like drinking at the bar, and then I get a call from my best friend from high school. He's like, hey, this dude's gonna call you in about 3 minutes. He's a former Marine major. Just listen to him. And I was like, okay. He's like, hey, I get this great job. You're going to work directly for this VP, and you're basically going to run her organization. I was like, great, let's go. I was like, when do I need to be there? He's like, can you be here tomorrow at 10 o'clock? And I was like, I am half-cocked in Utah. And he goes, can you be here tomorrow? I was like, well, we'll figure it out, man. So went out there, did that, and then it actually ended up coinciding a couple days later with an interview for another company. Ended up taking the job, and yeah.
What would you say for people that okay, so first off, I will say this. Those of you that are on the cusp of getting out have no idea what you're about to get into. I mean, you think you have this opportunities coming up, you have this coming up, some school told you this, whatever. 70% of that's probably true. The reality is, like, you're going to get out and that job you thought you had with the family member is not actually there, or, hey, it's going to have to be a few months because of finances and this and that. So, getting out is not as simple. It's not as simple as people think it's going to be. And getting out and like, oh, man, I was an E6 in the Marine Corps. I think it's twist off, man. Don't be a bitch about it. Getting out, like, guys are like, well, I was an E6 in the Marine Corps, so I'll get out and I should be rolling right into a 6 figures job because I'm a natural leader and I know McPP and
Nobody cares.
J tie buckle or JT tie buckle or whatever the hell it was. Tells you what kind of Marine I was. But in honesty, it's no one cares. If you were an E3 in the Marine Corps, you have as much pull in the civilian world as an O4. That's reality. Like, and unless you don't get a degree. And if you don't get a degree because you're, I don't know, get a degree because you have the GI Bill. If you don't want to get a degree, get a certification. Do something with your GI Bill. But in like all actuality, if you have a degree, if you get out as an E4 and you have a degree, you have as much pull as in 07, 06, 05 in the Marine Corps, because no one really understands. The civilian people that have never been in the military don't understand that. They don't know what an E5 was. They don't know what a 04 was. You know, they don't know any of that. So they just know you were in the military and you did some stuff that they could never comprehend. So getting out and going from the military to the corporate world, it's got to be kind of weird. I imagine it's less weird for people like in the Air Force and stuff. That seems way more corporate than the Marine Corps. But how would you say that the Marine Corps compares to the corporate world? And again, you worked at, so you're talking big tech. You're talking obviously Fortune 500. You know, like that's on. And we were talking about it earlier. I was like, dude, if I got an offer to before I got out, I'd be like, fuck yeah, like I made it,
Yeah.
you know? But so how did reality reflect with expectation, or how to, compare?
Yeah, so I would say the biggest thing is, right, at least being a Marine, there is 95% of the time you're going to get a yes or a no, right? So like, hey man, I want to do this, or hey sir, I want to do this. I'm thinking we should do it this way. And then they're like, yes or no. And then you adapt and overcome and you figure it out, right? So in the corporate world, the thing that I found is I'd be like, hey, we want to go this route, but there's also like this over here, and then there's this thing, and then the data is supporting something completely different, but we think we want to come at it from this way. And then they'd be like, okay.
And not pull the trigger on a
Right,
decision.
and then you're like,
okay.
So we're
it's like two people look at each other like, okay.
Yeah, you know,
so...
and I mean it's more of a squishy world, and I don't want to say it's like a good or a bad thing, but it's like it's
more forgiving.
It's hard. I don't know. And I mean, I had a unique situation in like the organization that I.
You want to discuss your actual role, like where you were at, just so give people like kind of a background. Those that are in the corporate world, what did you do in the corporate world?
Yeah, we need to go back in this and like take out the part.
I'll take out the company.
Yeah.
I'll take out the company name.
Yeah. But I mean, like I was working in a marketing organization, and it was like a lot of these signs that they were getting over and over and over, and it was just there was no action, and it's frustrating as a veteran to sit there and be like, you're seeing this over and over and over, and be like, just make a move.
Yeah.
Like just do something, like press the button or don't press the button, and
make a judgment call. What are we doing? What are we doing?
Like figure it out. And it's always like, oh, I don't know. Like maybe we'll press a button tomorrow. I'll be like, you can't do that. Like, and I always operate in the 80-20 rule, like I'm sure a lot of Marines do. Like you're always going to have the 80% solution, like, and then just like figure it out. So I found that to be like, when I say squishy, there's not a lot of 80-20. It's a lot of, we need 100% solution. How are we going to conquer this problem? And that blew me away. Like I was sitting there like the first time that they're like, we need to figure out exactly how we're going to handle this. And I was like, I know nothing about this world that I'm in right now. But I was like, I know if you don't do something, something's going to happen.
Yeah.
And I was like, the thing that you don't want to happen is going to keep happening. And I was just sitting there, and I was like, the thing that they didn't want to keep happening kept happening, and I was like, I need to remove myself from this situation. And it was just like at the end of the day, like I tried to fight it early on, and then I removed myself. And like while I was fighting it, I don't want to say I was actively displaced from the problem, but I was like,
yeah,
I don't want to say that I was put more towards the center of it.
Mm-hmm.
But all of a sudden, I find myself not away from the problem, and then
you're
I'm
not
just
part of the problem, but
right?
You're not
and I'm
away
like,
from the problem.
and then like I find myself in a new organization, and then I'm doing something that like I don't like, but I'm like moderately okay at, and then all of a sudden they're like, we're thinking about promoting you, and I'm like, I have found myself.
Okay, well, let's not do that.
I was like, I found myself in the wrong organization. There are a lot of people who'd be like, you're crazy.
So if you're let's say this. Let's say me, we're good friends. If I was like, hey man, I'm getting out of the military in 2 months, and I feel like my best suit is to go into corporate world because I have leadership capability or abilities and stuff like that. What kind of recommendations would you give me as, let's say, an enlisted guy? I was a staff sergeant when I got out, so let's just go with me as a topic. Yeah. I got out as a staff sergeant.
Not a member of the mess.
Bum, bum, bum. But I was a staff sergeant when I got out. I had no degree. I had some college because I took some college while I was in and stuff like that. If I was like, hey man, I want to get out and I want to get involved in the corporate world. I want to get involved in a Fortune 500 tech company. What advice would you give somebody like that?
So, the advice that I would give somebody like you, because there's a chance that I could probably identify you on my team a couple years earlier, now being able to go back, is I would say start networking yesterday.
Yeah.
Because like you need to figure out, first of all,
networking's the biggest thing that I think you learn when you're transitioning out. Like, fuck, I need to expand my network.
It's crazy. There are secret societies and societies of everything, and like I'm trying to find them back in Southern California because I left to go up to NorCal, and as we just talked about, I didn't like it, and I'm trying to come back down here and figure out.
It's a different world. USC owns the world down here.
Yeah, well, it's good that I'm going to USC.
Boom, boom, boom.
Yeah, but I mean, it's
go to USC. That's what he's saying.
It's just networking, like networking. I mean, we could have an entire podcast on how do you start networking, because I mean, it sucks and it's awkward, and it's people you don't want to talk to. It's people you don't like. But you need to do it to like get out there into the world and make yourself uncomfortable and like get out there and like actually meet these people, and like it's gonna work in your favor,
Yeah. Well, let's do that, man. Let's call it quits on this podcast. It's been a few hours. I think we've gone for. This will probably bust into 2 episodes, but I think we've gone for about 3, almost 4 hours. So we'll call it quits here, and I definitely want to have you on again and to talk about more transition stuff. Like, what do you see in the corporate world? What do you see that guys? Because I want to be able to tell guys that are in the military now what they can do to like better themselves, to get out and roll into that Fortune 500 job that they thought they were going to get. Because nobody wants to get out of the military 4 years later, 8 years later, whatever. I did 12 and I got out. I'm the unusual person. You don't want to get out after 12 years and be like, well, that was cool. And then go back to, for me, Lafayette, Indiana, and work at the fucking local factory and be like, yeah, I did 12 years of Marine Corps. It was cool. So, I want some people that are on that Fortune 500 side that are doing white collar work and stuff like that. That's not necessarily where I think everybody should end, or I don't think I should end there either. But, to have some insight. So we'll save the rest of it for that. But
for sure, man.
Is there any companies, anything you want to shout out? Anything?
I don't have anything yet.
Any final last words of wisdom?
I got a couple companies. When we do the redo, I'll go back and talk with them and make sure it's all good, that I shout them out. I don't want to go,
high and right with some people that don't know what's coming. Yeah. So that's cool. We'll come back. We'll bring you back on, and we'll throw out those company names and stuff like that. So for those of you listening, hit me up, J Kramer Graphics on my Instagram. You can also check out my website at jkramergraphics.com. You want to put your Instagram out there or leave it as?
You can check out my Instagram. It's at Rockets and Guns.
Rockets and Guns.
Yeah. So it's mainly pictures of my daughter, and then me golfing and things I hate about millennials. So.
All right. Well, hey, I thank everybody for coming out. Next week, actually, I haven't recorded an episode for next week, so I'll give an outro. I'll record one after this, but thanks for coming out, and check out the website. Make sure to subscribe and make sure to share it so we can get more people out.
Subscribe, like, review.
Exactly. Subscriptions and reviews are key.
And then unsubscribe. And then subscribe, like, review again.
Just to get to... We're looking for numbers here. We're numbers people right now. All right. Thanks, man. And all right, everyone. Have a good one.